agenda. We've had a very quiet year so far, and now we have 3 lively applications all at once today, so I do want to get started promptly. We do have a lot of people here by Zoom, and we will have you introduced shortly, but I'm calling the meeting to order. It's the November meeting, excuse me, I'm jumping ahead. It's the October meeting of the Sagaponic, the October 14th meeting of the Sagaponic Zoning Board of Appeals. And the first item of business, please join me in the pledge of allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, have the members of the board had an opportunity to review the September 9th meeting minutes? I have a motion to adopt. I'll second that motion. All in favor? Aye. Okay, then the September 9th meeting minutes have been adopted. They'll be placed in the code book in the Sagaponic Village Book, and anybody who wants to can read them. The first item of business on the agenda is the 110 Sand Dune LLC. This is seeking a variance for building height of 51 feet 9¼ inches in a 3-story structure, a pyramid violation. The application was renoticed because of a change in the height, which also impacted the pyramid law, which wasn't in the original notice. So for the applicant.
Also, the records show that I have the affidavit of mailing and posting.
David Gilmore Jr., Greenberg, Troy, and I'm bringing forward a statement in support of our application and the attendance exhibits to it. The legal notice indicates we're looking for the basic premise behind the need for the variances is we want to raise this existing house to meet the FEMA regulations. To do that, we need the variances that the chairman just listed. One important factor that I'd like to point out so that you can see the application where the number 51.9 is startling. Can I approach the screen? So we have the architect prepare an analysis of the pyramid law, and the part that's at the 51.9 is in green here. The rest of the structure is at 47. The green part, the part that's highlighted in green is the elevator overrun. There's an existing elevator that services Louis and Mary, who is the life partner of Edie Lutnick, who is handicapped and needs the elevator to access the house. So really, there's a very small portion of this request that's at the 51.9. It's highlighted there in green for you. Before I get into the application, I'd like to bring forward Leonard Jackson, who is our FEMA expert and can talk to you about the needs and why it's a benefit to the applicant. So, Mr. Jackson.
Hello, I am Leonard Jackson. I'm a professional engineer. I'm the principal of Leonard Jackson Associates. I've been a FEMA consultant for some 35 years. During that time, I've analyzed rivers and oceans and bays and prepared FEMA maps. Some of the other work that I do is I design projects to eliminate flooding for the Corps of Engineers as well. The project before you today is proposing to elevate an existing structure in order to meet the current regulations as though for new construction, and that means you have to elevate the lowest structure of the structural member of the house so that it's above the wave height. And in New York State, we have to elevate it 2 feet above the wave height. So the proposal before it was to take an existing structure was constructed pre-firm prior to the flood insurance rate map and make it conform to the current regulations which the village has adopted, that promulgated by FEMA in the village floodplain regulations. The variance required has literally, well, I would say no downside. It does not conform to your elevation height requirement. But the benefit is to safety of both property and to life, of course. And it will allow waves to pass freely in the next perfect storm. The waves will freely pass under the dwelling. And there's literally no downside, other than somebody might think that the elevation may look higher, but other than that, there's no detrimental environment, but in fact, and even the environmental regarding the height or the visual aspect is negligible. So in this particular instance, the request for a variance has great benefit and very little or no downside. Are there any questions regarding the regulations? Yes.
What is the current new construction height, 2 feet above wave?
I don't know, I didn't check the map in
You don't
this
know?
case, but what you have to do is whatever the elevation is, if it's elevation 18 or 20, that's the top of the wave. You have to be, what is it,
VE 17.
or 17? So, okay, so the VE zone, if it's a VE 17, that means you have to put the lowest structural member of the house, which would be the beam, somebody held up by the piles, it would have to be at elevation 19.
Yes, Dave?
If you don't have any more questions.
No, I do, actually. Yeah, so your expertise is as an engineer and you are a FEMA consultant.
And the consultant.
So you can advise with respect to the safety of a homeowner with respect to the elevation of their home. Are you knowledgeable about zoning?
I am knowledgeable about zoning, because I'm not specifically, not this building, but I know that's.
When consulting in FEMA regulations, do you generally advise your clients what they have to do to comply with FEMA as well as local zoning codes?
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you generally advise them that they should design something which complies with both FEMA and zoning regulations?
We always try to comply with all regulations when we do a new project. Yes.
Marilee, you expressed an opinion about no adverse impacts. What do you base that opinion on, and what adverse impacts were you considering when you gave that opinion?
The only impact that I can see would be a visual impact, because the elevation of the house is higher than the code allows. Regarding the impact in the neighborhood, adjacent properties also have elevated houses. That's why I think that the impact is negligible. I've also visited the site. I've looked around to see what else can be seen with this site and what you can see from the site. And most of the houses, at least to the north, are distant from the house. And that's why just standing there, you can see that when this thing is constructed, if it is constructed the way it's proposed, it will have minimal impact.
You're speaking about this one house. If all of the houses along the beach were to be elevated to that elevation, would that have an impact on the neighborhood?
In my opinion, if all the houses are elevated as they are, like in the West Hampton Dunes, which was destroyed during Hurricane Sandy, the perfect storm, destroyed it and reconstructed it. They elevated all the houses. Aesthetic opinion, they're too close together. The elevation is, to me, is de minimis, but the houses are stacked like 10 feet apart. How it looks to me, I don't like it. But visually, vertically, as long as the houses are relatively separate, distant apart, I think visually it's okay.
So my question talks a little bit about what. Are we asking another question?
Please, no, I was going to ask you, because
Okay,
in the
yeah,
past, you've
yeah,
been
no, I have a
concerned
feeling about
about
these.
environmental
Yeah.
impacts in addition to.
Right.
visual.
Right, so one of the things that I think we often do is we think about it from only the human vantage point, right? That's all we're capable of. But, so I've lived here my whole life and have observed these beaches really changing over time, as we all have. And I think height of houses actually creates a wind problem on the beach that actually makes erosion more impactful to our beaches. And I base this really on observing our beaches, meaning walking from Bridgehampton to Wainscott, where you can, about 2.5 miles of beach, where there's in some areas uniquely right before this house is, there's no houses on the beach yet. And we have a really fixed dune there that I've observed ever since our beach nourishment project, which was in the mid 2000s that they put all the sand on the beach. Does anybody remember that? Those dunes haven't been impacted, but where you have a lot of construction on the dunes, especially a lot of height, it seems like that beach just gets scoured away even more quickly. And I would even go so far to say it doesn't seem that way. It seems like it looks like it. I've observed it out of airplanes, different maps, and they say, oh, it's erosion, but that's natural erosion. But I think that actually by creating all these hardened faces on our beaches of incredible height, we're actually making a problem worse for the beach banks and in the long term for those homes too. So what I think is best is if these homes do get elevated, but their size is actually reduced so that really the mass isn't there. And that's what I like kind of consider of no harm.
I understand your consideration and concern. In this instance, we also have to consider that this is an existing dwelling. And what they're seeking to do is make this existing dwelling safe. So it's not as though it's something.
There's no such thing as a safe.
I'll agree with you.
That's true.
Safer. Okay, so we have an existing condition which we want to make safer. As far as the height goes, the height is defined if you are going to construct the dwelling. Even a new one. If you are going to construct and allow construction on your beaches, you must achieve those heights. It's still defined now by law, and they're in your law.
The rafters on the first.
The lowest structural
Right,
horizontal
right.
member has to be in New York State, has to be 2 feet above the top of the wave. And so if you're going to permit construction on the beach at all, frankly, I prefer beaches without construction. But here's an existing dwelling that's they're seeking to make it safer and comply with your height regulations. And that's the one consideration as opposed to the other consideration. Now, as far as erosion, we won't go into that. In this instance, the downside, to leave this here the way it is a safety hazard. To raise it to safe elevation, you have to consider what is the effect of that, the environmental effect of that on an existing structure. And the answer is because it's an existing structure and because you're making it safer, there's very little new impact on the environment by allowing this. And that's why I think it should be raised.
From a certain perspective, but I would respectfully disagree.
If it were a new structure, that would.
They all are new structures though, like when it's actually something of this nature is done. I mean, there's pilings, like that's the way things are built here. That's neither here nor there. But I'm really just talking about the cumulative height over our dunes. And but it has nothing to do with your professional testimony.
In this particular instance, because the house is an existing structure, you have to consider that in making your decisions. Your decision will weigh the effect, which I think is negligible in terms of you, opposed to the safety of the property that was the benefits that would be approved. I think in this instance, you really should approve the variance because it's merited in overall consideration.
So within your expertise, though, you're confirming, number one, that it's an existing structure that need not comply with FEMA. It's voluntary, not mandatory. It's not required by the law.
That is correct. Right now, it's not mandatory.
Number two, you confirmed that if it were a new structure, you would certainly advise the owner to comply with FEMA regulations with respect to the minimum elevation, but also to stay within the zoning regulations with respect to the maximum.
Not only would advise it, but the law requires it.
Okay, so I appreciate your testimony and your forthrightness. Thank you very much.
Right.
So getting to the benefits, and the highlight of that testimony was the fact that raising this house will protect Mrs. Letnick, her family, her house, and her property. And let there be no doubt, there's a necessity to do that. FEMA isn't knocking down their door to do it, but there's a necessity, and it's right at our door. Next door in the town of East Hampton, they did a study. They call it the Clark Study, which is the Coastal Assessment and Resiliency Plan. If you look at page 28 of that, Exhibit B, it'll tell you that there's a 60% chance of a major hurricane in the next 30 years, the likes of which the 38 hurricane hit this area. And during that period of time, there's going to be sea level rise between 8 and 30 inches. I'm sorry, 8 and 30 inches. There's a clear and present danger for not only this structure, but any structure that doesn't conform to FEMA on the beach. I think this board also has to be informed by the impacts of Hurricane Ian that hit Southwest Florida. If you've seen the pictures, level. Fort Myers Beach is level, right? And you're going to allow that sort of action to happen here. And Mr. Chairman, you asked the question of our expert, and what he said is FEMA is not requiring it. Maybe not, right? I think they're advising us to do it. But your chapter 88 is telling you to do this. And I want to give you some quotes on the purposes and objectives in your chapter 88, which you give variances from, and that this application implicates. 4 big purposes and objectives: promote the public health, safety, and welfare, and to minimize public and private losses due to flooding. Qualify for and maintain the National Flood Insurance Program. Minimize public expense for rescue and relief efforts associated with flooding. And finally, and I think what is the seminal point in chapter 88 for this board, ensure that those in flood hazard areas assume responsibility for their actions. That's what Mrs. Lutnick is doing today. She is taking responsibility for her actions. I submit that a denial of this application shifts that responsibility and that liability back onto this board. And you ought to heed that as you consider this application. There are no detriments in this application. Really, there's only a benefit, and the benefit does not only extend to the Lutnick property, but it extends to all those property around Lutnick property. We're informed by that by FEMA that tells us you have to raise it to protect your neighbors and protect the environment. We've laid out that entire argument, and I would advise you to please read it before you make up your mind in this case.
If I can interrupt for a moment.
Sure,
I think you misconstrue my words and my attitude.
my apologies.
No, don't apologize. I wasn't clear. I fully appreciate and respect, and I'm sympathetic to the desire of homeowners to protect their properties, not just consistent with 88, but my own personal feelings that people should be able to protect their homes. What I'm concerned about is allowing that to happen by purposes of a variance, particularly one that is extraordinary. Zoning law affects either the entire community or a particular zoning district in the community. We have a specific zoning district already for the beachfront, which gives a bonus of virtually a full story, 8 feet, from the standard 32-foot height that's permissible to a 40-foot height in this zoning district for all of the oceanfront properties. This request for a variance is to exceed that by almost double it. And the point isn't whether people should be allowed to elevate their homes to protect them for FEMA purposes, but whether they should be permitted to exceed the already augmented height that the village recognizes in order to allow that protection. And furthermore, whether we should accomplish that result by spot zoning, taking variances one at a time from each property, as opposed to perhaps having the village trustees consider a rezoning of the oceanfront district to take into account these new factors so that there would be consistency, as opposed to this board sitting here being asked to consider variances one at a time throughout the village, and perhaps setting precedent by allowing the zoning to change by increment as opposed to in a rational way. So I am sympathetic to people raising their homes. We have a second application here from another party who is also seeking to raise the home. Interestingly, these applications are seeking to raise existing homes by just elevating. There was a recent article in which Massey was featured in designing homes specifically so that they could be more storm resistant while still being aesthetic and practical and not necessarily exceeding zoning requirements. I don't know the exact configuration of this house. Perhaps it's going to be disclosed in the hearing today, but we might want to hear some testimony as to whether there are modifications to the higher elevations of the house or the lower elevations of the house, such that it could be raised to be FEMA compliant without having to so exceed the maximum height that this variance is seeking.
Okay, you said a lot there, so let me take it point by point. Number one, variances are considered on each and every property. You can't consider its incremental impact. It's this application that's before you. Some thought that other people down the road are going to bring an application in is a theory that's been rejected soundly in the courts. This is an existing home that's being raised. If you're fully familiar with the houses that are on the ocean, and this was built when the town of Southampton had jurisdiction over the house, and the first elevations that I showed you that had the pyramid law, we saw that there were parts of that structure that already violated the pyramid law. The town of Southampton's law accepts elevator overruns and chimneys. That theory didn't migrate to the village of Sagaponic. You only accepted chimneys. So this.
Well, that accounts for 3 or 4 feet of the exceedance, right?
I mean, that's a significant part of the
All right, but-
exceedance, but if you take a look at what you did next door at 42 feet, the bulk of the request of this application is at 47. It's 5 feet more, so this idea that it's this huge measure at 51 feet, I think is faulty, frankly. Spot zoning is a theory when a municipality zones something, not when an applicant asks for a variance. The only, I'm sorry.
No, what I was suggesting is that because I believe there's something around 50 oceanfront properties in Sagaponic. And whether there will be variance applications or not from those homes, my suggestion is that because of environmental conditions, if the current zoning law is inapt for current circumstances, perhaps that zoning district should be revisited as opposed to the zoning board doing it haphazardly, one variance at a time.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't exist yet, and this is our only opportunity to be able to raise our house. And again, it's a clear and present danger. I think we touched on it before, but I think it needs to be said that the only possible detriment, and I have a pretty good imagination with this stuff, is that the house will somehow loom over, impact people on the beach. The character here is that we have 2 houses on either side that are FEMA conforming and will be FEMA conforming. So the only impact really on the height part of it, and again, it's a very insignificant portion of it, is from the beach. And this house is set back behind a pretty significant dune, and it's 275 feet from mean high water. To put that into some sort of perspective, this is in the R120 zone, and your requirement on lot width is 200 feet. So this is more than a lot away. I think it's a reasonable statement to make that any additional height here, it's already raised, any additional height will not have a significant further impact. So you take what is and can only be described in front of the zoning board as the greatest possible benefit, the protection of life, the protection of property, the protection of the house, right? Against what little detriment is there, and it seems to me that it's overwhelming in this case, that the benefits far exceed any detriments. We touched on the character of the neighborhood. I think we've beaten it. I haven't raised the part of the test, but there's no other alternative for us. We hope that the village board would see fit to change it tomorrow and allow us to do something here. The next question is substantiality, and it's been touched on, and I think I've addressed it sort of tangentially, but to address it directly is, again, a small portion is at the 51. The bulk of this is at 47. It's an existing structure. It's 5 feet above what you gave next door to a new structure. We're raising an existing structure that means a significant amount to my client. And as you consider this application, you're required to consider the totality of the circumstances. And those are the circumstances. And I would say it's not substantial.
I just want to make sure I completely understand from this drawing, right? Is this what we started with?
Yes,
on the-
I don't know, is it green on there?
It's sort of two different shades of blue. It was originally there, yeah. So the green is the tallest part of the variance, meaning that's at 52.
51.9.
Okay, and then where you see the darker blue plane,
Right.
that part is going to be, the tallest portion of that is going to be 5 feet above. Is that what you're saying?
It's at 47.
Right.
It's 5 feet above the property to the east where you just did that.
Right, so, okay, so what we don't actually have here is we have this drawing that shows the largest portion at 52. But we don't because this shows the whole second story, or third story,
I believe you are looking at the,
or is there another one?
you're looking at the plans that were submitted.
Mhm.
When we saw a survey that, or a pyramid analysis that was put in by one of our objecting neighbors, we had this created. So this is a new document. Again, that area in green is the only part that's at 51. It's the elevator over one, which.
But you could imagine taking a red pen to the white part of the house and show us that 5 feet too, right? There's also 5 feet.
No,
that
that's
we're talking
actually
about.
7 feet. The white part is the blue trapezoid is the
42
pyramid.
feet,
That's 40 feet. That's the pyramid.
right, okay,
Okay, that's the 40-foot permitted. The white structure is entirely above the 40. Mr. Gilmartin's comment is that there was a variance granted for a 42-foot height. So even though that is 7 feet above the elevation, it's only 5 feet above the size of a prior variance was granted.
To a new structure.
For a new structure.
Not to.
7.9, that's almost 8.
What was the address of that property?
108. I think there was here.
So I have a question on Ms. Bluster's question. So the top of the second floor elevation is the roof line. What is that elevation? And then the other question would be, what is the elevation of the first floor, the second floor, and the roof elevation existing right now?
It's, that information is in the.
I can't find it. Maybe you can
so
point
then
that out
we
to us.
assume that this is one, even though this would be 42.
No, it's 3.
I don't know if our architect is on there, who has these on this ballot.
Andres, do you want to share the screen?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone.
Put your video on if you're going to.
I don't have a camera, but I'm happy to share my screen if I'm allowed to. The host is disabled.
Yes, okay. Let's. Try now.
Did that work?
It did.
Okay, so the top drawing shows the existing elevation of the home, and the bottom drawing shows the proposed elevation. The BFE line here is at 19 feet. And the top of the existing master bedroom floor is at 47. The overrun of the chimney and elevator are here at 51.9 1/4. And then the original elevation of the top of the master bedroom is 37.2 3/4 with the chimney at 42. So in the three-dimensional drawing that you saw earlier, I can flip to it quickly. The only portion that is exceeding the 40 at the current state is the elevator overrun and the chimney. And in the proposed state, it is pretty much the entirety of the master suite. This is a very unique house in that it's called a split 2. So everything sort of to the right of the blue volume is shifted, so it's not entirely aligned from floor to floor. So one thing that I would add to Mr. Gilmartin's statement is that only about 40% of habitable area exceeds the 40 feet. Predominantly, the balance of it is deck and the roof of the living room below, which is not habitable. So there is a large deck that has uncovered. There's the chimney and the elevator overrun, and then there's the master suite, which takes up about 40% of the footprint of the floor. So it is less than half of the exceeding volume.
Going back to the question, is the top of the second floor roof, the existing height is, he's went through the changes of the new plan.
If you look at A201, is that in your packet?
I got it right here. It says 47 feet. That's the change, correct?
That's the proposed, yes. It's a difference.
$37.
So it's 10 feet.
Okay.
The 10 feet is what gets us up to the FEMA level, the compliant level.
So the existing first floor is, elevation is
10 feet above existing grade. Existing grade was measured at 6'4 3/4". So it's about 4 feet above the existing grade, which I believe was done.
the elevation of that.
I'm sorry?
It's already above 19, you're saying?
No, it's currently the existing grade is 6 feet above sea level, 6'4 3/4 to be exact. And the
4 3/4.
6 feet 4 3/4 above sea level. We would need, in order to be FEMA compliant, our lowest horizontal structure needs to be at 19.
What is the floor level now?
10 feet above sea level.
So the elevation 10, you're saying?
Yeah, it's the lower level. It's 10 feet 4. So you take a few steps up, which is why we also have the ramp at the front of the building to enter the home.
Okay.
Just to make one point here,
So that's a 10-foot raise, correct?
Yes.
the issue of the precedential effect, I think the ZBA may consider the precedential effect on a decision. I think that's been clearly stated in the health division case law. And I mean, we're not forever bound by precedent, but
I understand. I think you misunderstand my point. I was saying it the other way, you're not bound by what you've done. I understand that. That's the basic premise. My point was that you can't look at other properties who haven't made an application or been going through the process and gotten a decision and make decisions based on what might happen in the future.
no, but I
That
think
was my point.
they can consider the potential precedential effect of a decision on future applications of the neighborhood. I actually think that's been upheld. Now, that doesn't mean that they can never deviate from precedent. I agree with that. They can deviate, but they can consider the fact that if they do make a decision, it may make it harder in the future to then deviate from that variance grant. And I think that's something that they can.
To that very point, your application today, you're making the point that a variance was granted for 42 feet. So you're attempting to use a prior variance to support your variance
No,
yourself.
no. Understand the distinction. The distinction was not that you were bound by it, because I know better than that. The distinction was the character of the neighborhood and quantifying the actual exceedance and its impact. There's a big difference. I never said you had
No,
to.
I didn't say we're bound by it. What I'm saying is you are using
I did
prior,
that. I did not use that.
you
for that purpose.
referred to a prior grant of variance, by the way, to a house that hasn't been built and probably won't be built. But you have referred to a prior variance of 2 feet to justify the 47 feet by saying, well, it's only 5 feet above a previous variance that was given. So you're at least arguing that because a prior variance was given, it justifies a further variance. And we have sort of an effect of, well, they got 2 feet, we want 7 feet. The next one says, well, we want 9 feet. It's only 2 feet more than the 7 feet you gave. We may not be bound by it, but it certainly impedes the quality of the zoning, the consistency of the zoning, which is critically important to this village.
Let me be clear on why I offered the neighboring property. One, to demonstrate the character of the neighborhood, that the houses on either side were FEMA conforming. Second reason I offered it was to quantify the size. I started this presentation saying that it was at 51.9, but it was a small portion. Using the property and what you gave before is I was using to quantify, not to say that you were bound by it. You're never.
I'm not suggesting you said we were bound by it, but you're using it. And by the way,
But that was
I
the
might
implication.
remind you that your very own client strenuously resisted the granting of that variance to the adjacent property and did shadow studies as to how that would affect her property. Did you do shadow studies to demonstrate how granting this variance on this house would affect the neighboring houses?
We did not.
Okay, well,
You still saw fit, I guess, over the study to grant that variance. My understanding of that argument, and I was not a part of it, and I didn't represent Ms. Lutnick in that, it was about the size of the structure. But I think we're in the weeds on that a little bit anyway. Getting back to the balancing test, the other final 2 factors that you have to consider are the impacts on the environment. Here, we're guided by FEMA that the impact is a positive impact, that the environment will be protected by raising it. You're not going to have a house that can be taken out and create whatever issues, and those issues are probably pretty clear to us from Sandy, the impacts of that. So we're avoiding that. So the impact of the environment is a positive one. And, I would argue that this is not a self-created hardship. This is an imposition of FEMA on this and the impacts of the changes to our environment that we're feeling every day and were borne out in the study. It's a 2-year study done by the town of East Hampton. And I gave these statistics before on sea level rise. There's going to be a problem here.
the FEMA did not create the hardship. If it's a self-created hardship, it's because your client acquired a house on the beach, not because FEMA now has tried to protect people from doing so.
Well, I would, if I could respond to that by saying, when this house was built and when all the COs were done, this was conforming. Right? The science, and we have advanced, have changed, and now, we're safer. Cars are safer, everything's safer
I
today.
agree. So let's turn to something that's more germane, and that is what feasible alternative might there be? The space that was shown as exceeding the pyramid law and the heights that permitted under the zoning is basically a bedroom. Let's forget for the moment the chimney and the elevator, which are, as you point out, a very, very small part of the variance and they're not very obstructionist. But the major portion of the exceedance is an empty space, it's bedroom. Is it feasible or possible to relocate the bedroom within the footprint of the house or an expansion of the footprint of the house which would not violate, for example, side lots or front lots, still accommodate her housing needs without having to go up.
It was not. Remember, in this house, and all houses on the ocean, you don't have a basement, and your mechanicals that are in this house on the first floor, they have to be raised, so that takes up a portion of the habitable space. The other thing that I think I want to make clear, and Andres can correct me if I'm wrong, but 40% of the exceedance is dedicated to that bedroom. 60% is the rest, the decks and everything. So I know, but so, I think 40% habitable space on the exceedance, I think is reasonable.
But the bulk of the structure which exceeds the height is essentially the bedroom. I'm just curious to know whether there was a feasible alternative to relocate that bedroom space within the house without having to just elevate it above.
I had this discussion, anticipating this question, and the answer was no, because we have to have the mechanicals on the first floor, and you have to raise the mechanicals.
No, I understand the mechanics have to go up, but that doesn't necessarily negate the ability to relocate the bedroom elsewhere within the house, even if the mechanicals do impinge upon a substantial portion of the new first floor level at FEMA elevation.
There wasn't the possibility, my client considered it, said that wasn't possible.
Were any studies done or any plans done for a landward expansion of the house, perhaps, to accommodate another bedroom on a lower level?
There was not. I don't know what the expense of that. I think the
Okay, well, expense is one thing, but feasibility is another. And I'm just wondering whether it was at least explored.
to the best of my knowledge, and if Ms. Sutton is on, she can correct me if that statement is wrong. But we did consider relocating the bedroom within the structure, and it wasn't possible based on the location of the mechanicals and our requirement to raise them.
So what is the square, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's in these plans,
Which we just got.
I know, but the square footage of the master bedroom. You're saying it's 40% of what's over, but what actually, I'm just curious because we were talking so much about on that previous application about how big that master bedroom was, and it was something I wasn't really comfortable talking about how big people's master bedrooms are, but I'm just curious.
Andres, do you have that number?
The square footage.
I can get it. Just give me a few minutes. I would add that the master bath and closet, so it's basically a suite. It's not entirely the master bedroom.
Yeah, so I guess what I want to know is that second story, like I'm looking at that picture that shows the floor split. Second floor.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, so I guess I'm curious of what that comprises the master suite. What is that square footage?
Give me 1 second. I'll try and get that for you.
That's the closet.
Sorry, it's about 1,000 square feet.
Thank you.
And that includes, part of that is taken up by the stairs that come up from below.
So to clarify, it's just the bedroom is 1,000 square feet?
No, it's the suite. Can you break that down among the bathroom, the closet, and the bedroom?
Sure. The bedroom is 480. Closet is 240. And the bath area is 300.
Right. Somebody's phone. Turn it off, please.
No idea.
Thank you.
Did we get a bathroom?
The bathroom was 300 square feet. 300 for the master bathroom, 240 for the master closet, 480 for the master bedroom. I assume that includes the elevator lobby, which is a piece of that long section, which was to the elevator, which exceeded that went to the 51 feet.
I can break that out separately. That was not included. Give me 1 second, please.
Separated, so it looks like it's one.
That is 100 square feet.
Okay. Marilyn, further?
No,
questions on that?
no.
David, you want to continue?
Just to conclude,
Yeah.
we're guided by FEMA. We're guided by the CORP study of the town of East Hampton and the implications of this and the dangers that we see coming in the near future. And we think we should be guided by that as well. I'm going for a request. Thank you.
Do you have anyone else here speak in favor of the application? No, well, you can rebut, because I believe we have someone here who wants to speak in opposition to the application. Oh, by the way, before you begin, let me just say, you just handed us a statement in support. This was from whom?
It's from
What?
From my firm.
From your firm, okay. So we're not waiting for someone else to testify on behalf of this, it would be you.
You got it.
Thanks.
Sure.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Lucas Strunk, 37 Windmill Lane, Southampton, New York, for the adjacent neighbors, Anthony and Cynthia Tetrello, who own property at 108 Sandon Court directly to the east of his property and other lots as well to the east of his property. About 6 months ago, I was here before you, and the board turned down the majority of the variance requests that my client had made after 5 long hearings that took place over about a year. All of the variance requests that the Petrellos made were opposed by Edie Lutnick. The board listened to her opposition, and in its decision, it sided with her positions in several major respects. The board listened to Mr. Messina, who vociferously objected to the Petrellos' requested variances. I find it mind-boggling that we are here only 6 months later, and Ms. Lutnick is asking this board for variances that are far more extreme with far less support than every single one of the variance requests that were made by the Petrellos. I really, truly find it mind-boggling. Just to address those requests with some specificity. I want to point out first that the structure does not conform to zoning, and yet the applicant is requesting a significant increase in the degree of nonconformity. This is a structure that is already highly nonconforming. It does not meet applicable side yard setbacks. It does not meet existing pyramid requirements. It does not meet existing height limitations. It does not meet existing FAR limitations, and it does not meet the 125-foot dune crest setback. It was built pursuant to the approval of the town of Southampton, but it does not comply with current village zoning, and therefore it is the definition of a non-conforming structure. And what we have here, which is explicitly prescribed by the village code, is an attempt to increase the degree of nonconformity of a nonconforming structure. Section 245-53D of your code states a nonconforming building or other structure that is devoted to a conforming use may be enlarged, reconstructed, structurally altered, or restored in whole or in part, ... except that the degree of nonconformity shall not thereby be increased. And that's exactly what's proposed here. It's actually proposed to be increased massively. And I'd like to point out also that even if the footprint is not changed, the raising of the house within the side yard setbacks that are already non-conforming requires an additional variance, and it's considered an increase in the degree of non-conformity. We have here today I have here today with me Jim McMullen, who is an architect who works for my clients. He's done his own calculations, which he will show to you afterward. Currently, by his calculations, the existing residence exceeds side yard, pyramid, and height requirements by 19,000 cubic feet. And the proposed raised residence would exceed those requirements by 47,248 cubic feet. So that would be a 248% increase in the degree of nonconformity, which is just so extraordinary. I'd like to go through it one by one in terms of the nonconformities, starting with the number of stories. I cannot fathom how this is considered to be a 3-story structure. If you look at the elevations, there are clearly 4 stories proposed here. I don't know if I don't. I was not provided with them, but I'm sure you have them.
I think we just got them.
Yeah, we just- I don't know how it's possible. Either we just have them today, but it's something that has to be
You want these while you're speaking?
It would be very helpful. Thank you. Yes, that, but don't forget to a few pages, I think to A201. Okay, A201, A201. Thank you very much. Okay, so you can see them, you have them as well. My understanding is the existing is above. Existing is 3 stories. Proposed is below, and proposed is 4 stories. You can clearly see 4 levels of a building with 4 levels of terraces and 4 levels of banisters and outside decks. How is this not a 4-story structure?
In fairness, one of the 3 stories that exist is technically a story under our code, but it is either breakaway walls or is not habitable space. And we have traditionally not considered that as a story in terms of our variances.
I do understand that.
Just
And I wouldn't be, if it was that, I wouldn't be talking about it. But you can see what's proposed when you raise it, you're adding that breakaway level below, which is a story, but you can give a variance for that. I totally understand, you have many times, and I have no issue with that. But above that breakaway level are 3 more stories. It's a 4-story structure. I find that shocking. Okay, next, next is the question of height, which was discussed quite a bit. At its maximum, their request is for almost 52 feet of height. My clients requested and received a height variance for 2 feet 4 inches. And that was in large part due to an accessibility issue. And Edie Lutnick fought that request tooth and nail through 5 public hearings. And now she's coming to this board asking for 12 feet, which is, I think, the height of hypocrisy. We also went so far as to do a line of map modification with FEMA. We got the FEMA map modified to ensure that we would ask for the minimum height variance from this board, and Mrs. Lutnick has not done that. There's also precedent against the proposed height variance or the requested height variance, and that's the case of 1145 Sag Main, which this board decided a few months ago. And this was actually a much less problematic application because the site was much larger. The only proposed nonconformity was height in the 1145 Sag Main application. There were no side yard nonconformities. There were no pyramid violations. There were no FAR violations. There were no 125-foot dune crest setback violations. And so those were not, there were not those additional nonconformities. And yet this board denied a request for an 11-foot height variance for the same justification, with the same justification to raise the existing structure to meet FEMA. My view is that this application presents a far worse scenario than the one that the board decided denied at 1145 Sag Main. That parcel was 36,749 square feet. This parcel is 41,292 square feet. So that parcel is 8 times larger than this parcel. And because this parcel is relatively small, the impact of all of those nonconformities on neighbors will be greater. In fact, during the Petrello's application, Ms. Lutnick's attorney, Vinnie Messina, argued vociferously that greater setbacks would decrease the impact of the increased size and height that the Petrellos were requesting. Although I should point out that the Petrellos met the 30-foot side yard setback on Ms. Lutnick's side. And actually, the Petrellos' lot is almost twice as large as Ms. Lutnick's lot. Their lot is 79,958 square feet compared to Ms. Lutnick's lot, which is 41,292. In contrast, the Lutnick house is set back only 6 feet from the boundary with the Petrellos' lot. So by her own lawyer's logic, the visual impact of the huge height, GFA, pyramid, and setback variances that she needs is far worse. Also, as came up before, and I know the board is aware of it, the board noted in its decision in 1145 Sag Main that an existing house is not required to be raised to comply with FEMA-based flood elevation. In that case, this board found the applicant is not required to raise its structure to the height referenced in section 88-17A, as it is an existing structure, not new construction. Applicant admitted that the proposed elevation is not required for one choice. And whether or not the applicant today is admitting that, it is certainly the case in this application as well. And with that application, this board found at 51 feet, the dwelling would be the tallest structure in its neighborhood. No structure on Sand Dune Court or within 1,000 feet of the dwelling is as tall as the proposed dwelling. The dwelling would be approximately 5 to 10 feet taller than most, if not all, of the dwellings in the vicinity of the property. The aforementioned can be seen on Google Earth, of which the board may take judicial notice. So the board concluded that to raise 1145 Sag Main to 51 feet above sea level would produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood. It said that compliance with FEMA floodplain standards, though not necessary at this time, can be achieved with an alternative design that falls within the 40-foot height requirement. And I would submit that the same logic applies here. Also, the board held that the difficulty here is self-created. That it was the applicant's preference to do so, and the applicant purchased the property with knowledge of its existence in a FEMA flood zone. The county clerk's office down, I have not been able to obtain a copy of Ms. Lutnick's deed, but based on the records I've reviewed from the town of Southampton, it's my understanding that she purchased after 2002. And certainly FEMA flood maps were in place at that time. So the same logic applies in this case. I would submit that this decision is res judicata as to all similarly situated applications. And that if Ms. Lutnick wishes to raise her house, then just like 1145 South Main, she will have to redesign it so that it conforms to zoning and the degree of nonconformity is not increased. I'm going to quote Mr. Messina again. I listened to him as you did for a long time. He said, you build a structure to fit the zoning shouldn't have to fit the structure you want to build. And last point on height is that there is a roof deck on this house that directly overlooks the Petrello's property. And this raises a serious privacy concern. If you raise this existing roof deck by 10 feet, the roof deck will be literally towering over the Petrello's house. And this is out of keeping with the character of the neighborhood and completely unacceptable. I'd like to move on to pyramid. I didn't hear that discussed. We've done, Mr. McMullen and his firm have done their own pyramid analysis. I note that the drawings that were prepared by the applicant's architect are misleading. They don't show any, they do not show a perspective from the east side, which is my client's side, which is where the largest pyramid variances are required. The largest non-conformities exist. It's 6 feet at its closest point. So just by definition, it's already well into the pyramid plane. And Mr. McMullen, after I speak, will show a video that his firm prepared that shows the house from all angles and some illustrations. Obviously, the pyramid law exists to protect neighbors, but by raising this non-conforming house by 10 feet, the applicant is asking the board to approve a structure that would tower over the Petrello's property. It would not be stepped back as the pyramid law requires, which would obviously lessen its impact. It would be extremely damaging to the Petrello's enjoyment of their property. Side yard setbacks, the house already just does not conform. I don't understand why this was not raised by the building inspector as a necessary variance, because when you have an existing non-conforming structure that impinges upon a side yard setback, and then you add height to it, you're increasing the degree of non-conformity and you require a variance for that. So I think that should be part of the variances that are required for this. The volume outside of the applicable side yard setbacks is absolutely massive. The volume outside of the pyramid plane is massive, and the volume outside of the height plane is massive. It's all being greatly increased by this proposal. Floor area ratio. My clients requested and were denied a smaller floor area ratio variance. Sought 7,920 feet of principal dwelling where the code limits it to 6,997. That was 13%. We sought 2,696 feet of roofed accessory where the code limits it to 1,049. That was 157%. We sought a total of 10,616 square feet where the code limited it to 8,046, which was a total of 32%. Ms. Lutnick is seeking 6,061 square feet of principal dwelling where the code limits it to 5,318. That's 14%. That's greater than the 13% we requested. She's seeking 2,955 square feet of roofed accessory where the code limit is 798 square feet. That's a 270% request compared to our request of 157%. And she is seeking a total of 9,016 square feet where the code limits it to 6,106 square feet, 47%, as compared to our total request of 32%, which, as I said, was denied. Now, the turn down letter, I think, should also have called out an additional nonconformity that requires a variance, which is non-compliance with the 125-foot dune crest setback that's set forth in section 245-66B1 of the code. which states that on waterfront lots, and I'm quoting, all new or replacement buildings and structures, including both principal and accessory structures, shall be set back no less than 125 feet from the crest of any and all ocean beach dunes. So this is a replacement building. Clearly, that 125-foot setback applies. And so it doesn't, I think about 3/4 of this house is seaward of the 125-foot dune crest setback. That hasn't been discussed. That hasn't been discussed at all in the course of this application. And I think I don't understand how this was not, this nonconformity was not called out by the building inspector in the turnaround letter. There was a similar issue raised by the neighboring house to the west at 122 Sand Dune Court, which to my knowledge is owned by Ms. Lutnick's brother, Howard Lutnick. There, just like this one, the house pre-existed the enactment of the 125-foot dune crest setback. Mr. Lutnick proposed to raise his house to comply with FEMA. But in order to mitigate that increase in nonconformity, he voluntarily moved his house back significantly from the dune crest, and the board granted the variance on the sole basis that the property was becoming more and not less conforming. There were no height variances required, there were no setback issues, no pyramid variances were required. The house was redesigned to conform as much as possible with all zoning, with the sole exception of the dune crest setback, but that setback increased significantly. And I see no reason why Ms. Lutnick could not do something comparable in this situation. So I hope that this presentation has highlighted what I feel is the extraordinary hypocrisy of this application, given what we went through with Ms. Lutnick's opposition to my client's application. We think the points are self-evident. We think this application should be denied outright. Now, if the board is going to entertain an 11-foot height variance, a 47% FAR variance, approve a house with 4 stories, this, I think, would be really a sea change in the variance precedent in this village. Very likely to submit their own application and ask that it be decided again by this board if that would be the new regime that this board would adopt in response to this application. It's our view that this shouldn't even go on a minute longer, that the application should be denied in its entirety. If it's going to be considered, however, we would like the opportunity to submit these points in writing and answer any questions.
Quick question.
Please.
You mentioned in the context of the 125-foot dune setback that this is deemed a new structure.
It's a replacement structure.
It's a replacement structure. It's not a modification to an pre-existing non-conforming structure.
I'm going by the language of your code, and it says all new or replacement buildings and structures shall be set back no less than 125
Yeah, but
feet.
I don't have the definition in my mind. Do you?
Yes.
Is this deemed under the code a replacement structure?
No, I don't think it would be. I think that's the distinction that's made by the building inspector and why it wasn't mentioned in the turn down.
So what's the distinction in that?
I think if a structure is destroyed and it's in a situation where substantially destroyed, I think that's.
Is there a percentage of alteration that we apply in that case? Do you know offhand? Yeah,
Typically, you see this.
all right, but that,
Thanks for pointing that out. I will go back and look at
I didn't think it was a replacement structure. Second, are we clear that there is no implication of the coastal erosion zone regulations 4215
that.
here? Is there maybe?
You should probably ask the
Yeah.
applicant that. I looked at the site plan and it looks like the structure is seaward of the coastal erosion.
Okay, because that would also have implications if it is, and I didn't hear that it wasn't.
I'd like to ask Mr. McMullen to show the video that he prepared, and also we have illustrations that he's done that we emailed previously to Pat. And I'd like to, I probably have too many copies here, but I'll pass them to you. This is one of the files that this is the file that I emailed this morning, and then there's a I would probably email Pat copies of those other two zoning board decisions. Okay. Thank you.
Give me the word for this.
You can actually bring it up now and start the video. It's just a quick video that circulates, goes around the structure to show all the sides of the property. And the blue sections are a combination of the top horizontal one, it's the height limit. The two slanted pieces on either side, that's the pyramid law. And then the two vertical are the setbacks. So this is really just a volumetric diagram to show the volume of non-conformity that this house is already in, and then what will be after this building is complete and lifted on piles. Do you have this that you can bring up? We can send it to you. Something that we can see a little better. And again, the blue is the planes that the code prescribes. The green is the portions of the house that are conforming, and the red is the portions that are non-conforming as the house stands now, as well as after this project is completed. And these are from all kind of four sides. The top left is from the side of Mr. Petrello's house. As you can see, there's already portions of the house that are over the setback, as well as over the pyramid on that side. And then top left proposed, you can see how much more will actually break those planes, as well as on the roof. And if you go down to the bottom left, now this really starts to kind of pop out at you on how much of this house will be out of conformity. So, as Nika said, with this existing setbacks, pyramid, and height limit, we calculated just over 19,000 cubic feet. When the project would be complete, we estimate that it's going to be about 47,248 cubic feet of volume outside the buildable area. That's all I have.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Gilmore, do you want to respond to any of these comments at this time? By the way, I would suggest, based upon past experience, especially since we got so much new material, either last night or today, that rather than closing the hearing, I think it appropriate to give both sides an opportunity to respond to information that they may have only just seen today. And I think at the end of today's presentation, I'm going to recommend that the board continue the hearing rather than close it. So if you would like to reserve any comments today, David, you will not be precluded from doing so later. But you're welcome.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I want to leave some of the points here left unsaid, and I'll try and be brief as I pitch them. First of all, the survey shows, Mr. Woodson, reviewed it, it's behind the coastal erosion hazard area, so that's not an issue. Secondly, that whole presentation that I just heard sounded like it was under the assumption that an existing house wasn't there. Right? This isn't being built new. It's an existing house that's being raised. So with the raising of that house comes this relief that we're required. And it sort of highlighted in the misstatement that this is a 4-story house. It's a 3-story house. I think it was clear on the plans. I don't understand, and I guess it's mind-boggling to me that somebody would call this a 4-story house when it's a 3-story house. It went through the building department and acknowledged as a 3-story house. The only reason why it's a 3-story house is because the elevator is enclosed, which it has to be enclosed. That's what creates the bottom story. There's no habitable space, only the elevator. The code allows you stairs, but doesn't give you the right to the elevator. And there's an existing elevator that's being used, and that's what's being raised. So I think it's disingenuous to say that it's 4 stories. Right? I think it's not completely accurate to say it's 3. It's 2 habitable space stories with an elevator at the base. Then we talk about the pyramid law. Of course, we have to exceed the pyramid law. We're exceeding the height. But again, that is to protect this house under FEMA. The final, no, not the final point, but the final point on the relief that we're asking for is, again, this house pre-exists the zoning code in the village of Sagaponack. It is not being expanded today. It is being raised as is. It was conforming when it was built under the regulations of the town of Southampton, which this village has acknowledges when the COs were brought over. And I think that was done within the last 3 years.
Actually, I did have a question, because wasn't this house renovated or fairly recently?
2004 was the renovation under the.
And when was it originally built?
I want to
Was it
say
2004 when the side turned blue? Like that was when the blue
that
part was
was
put
when
on?
that was done. I believe it was built in 65.
It was acquired by Ms. Lutnick in 2004.
Correct.
And that's when it was
That's when
renovated.
they.
And it hasn't, there's been no building there since. So it's the same house that was there in
Same house,
2004.
and she has a very particular attachment to it. So, so as the, the relief sounds awful when it's said, right? But if you take a deeper look and not the superficial representation that was made, but a deeper look at it, it's exactly the same structure that's existed there, started in 65, but then since 2004 was the last edition. It's the same structure, it's just.
But from a legal point of view, it does increase the level, the degree of nonconformity of a pre-existing nonconforming structure. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know, it's not getting closer to the line.
Doesn't matter. I think that it's still under our code. I believe our interpretations are that this would constitute an increase in the nonconformity of a pre-existing nonconforming structure, which we have to take
I
into
believe you have
account.
the ability to vary.
Well, we have to take that into account.
You have the ability to vary it. I will take a look at that and come back. I know in other places they set that line and you can come up to that line. No matter what. With that, we'll look forward to coming back.
Okay. Now, we do have a lot of people here on Zoom. I imagine most of them are here for the last application of the day, which is the Sag Harbor store. But if there is anyone here on Zoom or in the room who would like to comment on this application in Sandon Court, now's your chance. Anyone in favor or in opposition to this application? Yes.
Yes, my name is Lee Foster, and I've lived in Sacramento for a number of years. But more than that, I lived on the beach, and I lived on the beach until 1962 in a 900 square foot house on posts. In 1962, it was washed away, and where this particular dwelling is presently, the beach was quite clean, no trees, done. And this was a March 62 storm. I just want to mention that there is an illusion of health, I guess, and human safety. When you're on the beach and there is a storm, you leave the house. You do not stand there with a video camera and watch what's going to happen. You don't do that. You leave the beach, and I hope these people realize that. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, then I will entertain a motion to continue this hearing to the November meeting of the zoning board of appeals. When is it, Pat? November 1?
14.
Oh, yeah, well, we're gonna have a discussion about that later because that date is Veterans Day, right? And so we are going to entertain a motion to move the meeting for November to the Monday, November 14th. But since we're taking up that motion later, I'm merely going to agree to make the motion to adjourn this meeting to the November zoning board of appeals meeting whenever it is held, in case it has to be moved for a continuance of the hearing. And so I'll make that motion. Anyone all in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Then we will hear a continuation of this hearing, both written and oral submissions. If you're making written submissions, please try to get them to us at least a week, if not 10 days in advance of the hearing date. And make sure that you copy the opposing parties here so that we will perhaps be able to conclude the hearing at the next meeting and not carry it over because people haven't had a chance to review them through. Thank you for your participation. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second application of the day, which is the application of One Sweet Potato LLC. It's One Potato Road. It's application 3 of 2022. This is also a beach application, and it's a request for, I believe, 9 variances. I won't try to summarize them for you in advance, but I will allow the applicant to do so. Our esteemed sometime counsel, Anthony, you're on.
Thank you. Anthony Pasca, let's accept our angel Italian Pasca. We are the attorneys for the applicant, One Sweet Potato LLC. Our whole team is here. This is our meeting to answer questions. So I want to just introduce them briefly in case you have questions and I have to follow them up. So the architect, BMA, Ryan Vanderhullen, our landscape designers are Wardy and Design Landscape Architects. And Dorf is here. That's all of my own business also.
Does the record also show that I received the affidavit of mailing?
I wonder. Put up the site plan, which is, you all, I hope, have the packet that we submitted. What I'd like to do is to try to put a packet together so that we can work off of the same images rather than just keep opening up. It's this really has everything that we've submitted to date. So if you want to work off of the most recent packet.
That was just.
Yeah, I think that's.
Site plan. 6th page. Okay, so want to just introduce. Let's go back. 6th page PDF.
This is the 6th.
The survey. It might be a separate PDF. Okay, so the property, I listened to most of that last one, so all I want to say is every application, I hope, is judged on its own merits. And that we don't either get benefited or hurt by other applications that are before you. So I do realize we have to deal with similar issues.
Various issues.
So, but yeah, and every neighborhood is unique. So that's what I want to talk about. our property, our neighborhood, and difficulties that we're faced with. We're trying to redo this property. So we're at one potato, and we have a 100-foot wide lot that is right at the eastern end of Potato Road as it comes down and then curves. And that's kind of important to why we've made some design decisions and why we're asking for certain kind of relief from them. But being at the bend of the road is kind of critical to the variances that we're seeking. If we can go down a little further toward the water, I want to show you the sewer line. So you can see that the parcel is split by both the coastal erosion line, which all of our present application is north of the coastal erosion line, so we're not asking for any coastal erosion relief. And then there is the FEMA line, the division between the VE zone and the AE zone. And what's kind of important about that is that back before the maps were redone, I believe it was 2009, none of the property north of the dunes was in the VE zone. Everything south of from the dune south was in the VE zone, but there was no AE zone as it exists today, and it kind of we put up the aerial which shows the neighborhood. The FEMA zone kind of circles up around the east side of Potato Road. I could also hold the page for it. If you turn to the packet that you have, there's a couple of aerial photographs that show the neighborhood. And you can see how the FEMA flood zone only impacts the eastern 3 lots of the Potato Road. The eastern south lots, the lots that are south of the Potato Road. You see the line that's over here, it circles down this way. Okay. So of the 8 properties that are south of Potato Road, 7 have houses on them right now. The western 1, 2, 3, 4 lots are outside of the FEMA zone, and the eastern 3 lots, houses are within the FEMA zone, AE zone. So we're not talking about, ultimately we get to the discussion about elevation, we're not talking about a set of dominoes that's about to fall. There are only 3 lots, and number 25, which is the westernmost lot, has already been recently rebuilt pursuant to variances that this board granted a few years ago. So our lot number 1 and lot number 7 are the 2 left that are not compliant with FEMA out of all 8 parcels at the south side of Potato Road. We are also, there's the next page, Pat. Thank you. The larger aerial shows that this neighborhood, I think Potato Road South is kind of some unique neighborhood because we're flanked on each side by large parcels. We have the 18-acre 511 Daniels Lane just to the west that runs all the way from Daniels down to the ocean. And on the east, we have 2 5-acre lots along the ocean, plus the big 17-acre lot from Daniels Lane down there, all flanking Potato Road. So it's a pretty isolated neighborhood, and I think can be looked at on its own. The amount of distance, I guess you'd say, between the road itself and the dunes is also fairly unique. I think we have, maybe in Sagaponic, there's just to the other side of the 5-acre lots, there are 5 or 6 lots that are probably have tighter space, but other than those 5 or 6 lots, this is about as tight as it gets for a distinct neighborhood here. The Crestview properties have a little bit more room to the west, and this is about as tight as it gets. So Potato Road's a unique little neighborhood, and we are extra unique because we're located in that FEMA portion of Potato Road, where we have to deal with the AE 17 zone. So why are we here? Not surprisingly, portion of our goal is to become FEMA compliant. Both a preference, but also a necessity, because we're doing a substantial reconstruction. We don't have a choice when doing the substantial reconstruction, but to make the house FEMA compliant. This is, I guess, anecdotally, one of the last properties that had suffered a major catastrophe from the storm in 1998. So many of you remember the Kelleher house fell into the ocean. That's this property. So what's standing on this lot is what was built in the aftermath of the loss of the Kelleher house, which was much further to the south than the existing house, which was built north of the pool area and well away from the dunes. But that memory still exists, and maybe that had something to do with why when the FEMA maps were updated, they were changed to add to this pocket of AE zone protection. So goal 1 is to get FEMA compliant. Goal 2 is to add a modest amount of additional living space. And we're not asking for GFA variance, I promise you that. We've been very careful to design within the GFA allowances, but the existing house, the clients are looking for a little bit more space. And so when we looked at this parcel, the logical place to put it was to put it on the northeast side. That's the bulk of the additional living space is on the northeast side, away from the ocean and toward the bend in the road, which is what we'll get to in a little bit. But that's the main goal. There are a couple of additional areas of living space that we'll put in at the back, but I don't know if any of you guys see the property. It's really filling in negative space. So it's within the existing footprint. There are some negative space areas where the windows get recessed, where the design is just to pull the windows out to be flush with the wall, pick up a few extra square feet on the inside. So when you see the site plan, the portion that's in the back is not extending further toward the ocean, which is filling in that what I'm calling negative space. And then the last goal that we're trying to achieve on this is to just make some site improvements to the property. We have a landscape plan, which is at the back of your packet and shows that we are relocating the sanitary system, which is now in between the house and the pool, close to the dunes, and we are relocating that to the northwest corner of the property. That was the only practical location for it. Vegetation is being added to certain areas, and the access for parking is being rerouted to the northeastern side of the lot, which I'll get into a little bit, is really being designed because it's the most buffered, shielded area of the property, and made the most sense to put the parking on the northeast side and the sanitary on the northwest side. We gotta find a place for everything. But that's where we're focusing, is to put the parking away from our neighbor to the west and put the sanitary and the vegetation over on the west side. And the east side is already heavily buffered, both the north and east of the property. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. And you said you wanted me to go through the variances, and that's what I'm going to do. So we have 9 variances flagged by the building inspector. The first one is a height variance, and it is to get, when we're lifting the property to make it FEMA compliant, the back ridge of the roof, which the roof slopes down on the eastern side of the house. The back ridge of the roof hits will hit 45 feet 5 inches. It'll then slope down from there toward the front of the house, which will end at about 41 feet elevation. So the western side of the house has sort of a varied piercing of the height. The eastern side of the house has a flat roof. The western side of the house has a flat roof. And that's going to be at about 41 feet 2 inches up once the house is elevated. The second variance we're flagged for is pyramid relief. There's a pyramid diagram on here. And it's just a couple of corners. It's actually 3 different small corners that add up to 17 cubic feet. Pyramid relief. We then have a front yard setback request. And I want to explain this, and John may or may not jump in, but I hope he does. When we first noticed the application and came in, the front setback is taken from the south side of the street. The Potato Road is a kind of unique ownership of the road. And when we started examining all the other properties on Potato Road, we found that all of the prior variances had been listed as being taken from the north side of Potato Road as a result. So it's the same relief, except it's just measured 2 different ways. And so in order to compare apples to apples, we didn't want to compare our distance to a distance that was measured with the addition of 30 feet to it. And so I think John accepted our revised survey and would at least acknowledge that the number, the actual house has not changed in location. The number to be applied should be 30 feet should be hit. So we would be at a 62 foot front yard setback as opposed to a 30.
That setback is measured from the southerly edge of the Potato Road easement?
No,
From
the north.
from the northerly.
Yeah, it was where it was noticed at 32, it was 32 feet from the southerly edge. If you add the 30-foot width of Potato Road, it takes it up to 62.
So what you're calling it is one thing, but what it is legally is it's setback is measured from the northerly property.
It is, and it has been for other properties on Potato Road, so we're just using the same numbers. And I'm not suggesting it changes really much of the analysis, because the analysis is the same.
Physical bulk is going to be where it is. That's
Exactly.
just a question of how it's
But
measured.
sometimes you look at precedents and mathematical numbers too, it does affect the mathematical side, at least, in terms of setting a precedent. But the actual, nothing's changed about the application, just the number has gone down. And the same would be said about the front yard parking, which was basically going up to the property line, and would now be set back 30 feet.
So Tony, maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not, but I happen to dredge up from my files a drawing that was done for the JBR 81 variance.
25 potatoes?
Well, yeah, no,
81?
81 potato. I think this illustrates what you're talking about, isn't it? Where they're claiming that the average setback from the northmost property line existing was 71.4 feet. And that, I see here, making the turn on Potato Road, it's shown as the easement, but here
Yes.
it's included in green. So
Yeah.
that's what you're referring to.
That's what we're referring to. And I actually don't think there's a distinction. I think there's a shading distinction on that map you have.
Yeah.
I've never heard of a distinction as far as the ownership. It's a strange fractional ownership that all the owners share along Potato Road. At least Potato Road South, they all share in the ownership of the road.
But the average setback along that Potato Lane, Potato Road community is then measured from the northerly property line is currently 71 feet.
I can't verify it without going through. We did put, I'll tell you what we did though. We went through and figured out present day as best we could. And one of the aerials that we have lists the dimensions to the north side. So, I mean, I can't verify what they submitted, but I can tell you that what we found is listed on the area that's in your packet. So all the setbacks are listed, and maybe they, I can tell you what they say from west to east. We have about 56 feet for 91, 58.1 feet for 81, 45.1 feet for 71 potato,
What is your proposed setback from the northerly property line?
62.5.
From the northerly property line?
Yes, 62.5.
It doesn't make sense to me because I'm looking at what appears to be existing, and it's showing the existing residence is now 53 feet from the northerly property line, and you're seeking to move further to the north.
I'm telling you what our survey said
No,
here.
if this says the northern property line, it
Yes, so it's
doesn't say. No, that's not. That's not the northern property line. That's the north.
I think they're calling that.
Yeah, this is the line we're measuring from. They, for whatever reason, shaded only to here.
No, but this is the property line, correct? This is the easement line. And I'm saying 83 feet from the north of the easement line, but only 53 feet from the northerly property line. So what I'm asking you is what would be your setback from the northerly property?
You're assuming, that is assuming that that's accurate. The northerly property line is different for our parcel than it is for all the others. And what I'm telling you is it's not. It's the same, it's the same thing from west to east.
I'm confused.
But who owns Potato Road? It's not.
No, but forgetting about who owns Potato Road, it appears, forget about Potato Road. Let's just deal with the property line for the moment. Okay? Do you know what the setback is for the current structure from the current northerly property line, not counting Potato Lane, Potato Road?
Yeah, it's on the survey.
Okay, and that is 32 feet, 5 inches?
No, 32, let's do it this way. Proposed, what you're seeing is 32.5 is the proposed
Okay.
distance from, that was noticed, that's what was noticed as our front yard.
So the request is to have a 32 feet, 32.5 feet setback from the northerly property, ignoring the easement.
If you were to ignore the easement and only measure from the south of Potato Road,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
then it would be, yes, it would be 32.
32 feet.
Right.
And the current structure is how far from that point? It looks like must be close to 60 feet.
56.2.
I'm comparing the proposed two-story addition shown in orange against the 32.5-foot setback,
50, it's 56.2.
56. Okay. So it's basically, it's a reduction of the northerly property setback from 56 and a fraction to 32.
Yes, or if you measure from the north side, and the reason I say that is that in order to compare the line to everybody on the west, you have to compare apples to apples. So if the measurement on the west is being taken from the north side, then ours to compare it to where our front yard is going to line up has to be taken from the same line.
So take your point, if we're evaluating how it compares to the other properties and whether it introduces an undesirable change in the neighborhood, we would have to measure it consistently.
Yeah, that was the
I got it.
that was the point.
I get it.
So that is our front yard setback. We have a side yard setback for the generator. Generator's an existing generator that's in the northeast corner of the property that's being relocated to be right up against the house on a platform. It's going to be set back 11 feet on a platform and raised.
Do you have any specs for that generator?
It's on the last sheet of the packet, I think, is actually, on the generator itself, it's the existing generator, so we don't have specs on the equipment, but I have specs on where it's gonna lay out.
Well, it appears from the
On this
layout that it
drawing.
would be further away from any adjacent properties. So it's going to diminish its impact if you're moving it from the northeast corner to to the south
Great.
on that same
That was
side.
going to be my argument about it, but yes, that's the,
It increases the distance from any adjacent properties to where it would be relocated. I'd still be curious to know what its specs are on its DB levels and how it's.
try to get
If you can get that for us.
but I think it came with the house.
Oh, it's very old.
Whether we'll be able to
It should probably
recreate
be
that.
replaced.
Okay, and then we have also a side yard setback flag on the stairs that run along each side of the house. The setback 16.6 feet, or 30 feet required, and that is just for the one staircase. On that spec sheet that you see on the screen, what we've been able to do is locate some of the mechanicals underneath the stairs, so it kind of has a dual purpose for us, where the stairs are also doubling as a platform for the mechanicals to get them out of the base flood elevation, which is something we're required to do. We have number 6 is a dune crest setback for the rebuilt deck that wraps around the rear of the property. I don't know if we could pull up the survey again. It's I'm gonna walk over the screen if that's okay. This line right here, that's the pinch point for the dune crest setback of 109 feet, or well, whatever that distance is there. This deck existing goes a little further out. We squeezed it by a couple of feet just because it can still serve its purpose with a 5-foot circulation without having to extend a couple of feet closer. So if we're going to rebuild it, we're going to rebuild it and tighten it up a little bit by 2 feet. So that setback's 109 feet, where the 125 is required. We then have the rear additions that I described earlier, which are those. These two are the areas in here, which is that negative space that we're filling in. That's been flagged for dune crest setback. And the last is the parking in the front yard, front and side. We have obviously no other place to put the parking. So those are our 9 variances. Some of them are, they're a result of modifications to an existing house that also has non-conformities, but that's the nature of the game when you're doing renovations like this. It sounds like a lot of variances. In context, it's a thoughtful application. I'd like to go through these variances in a couple of groups, because if this there's no reason to talk about the front yard without talking about parking and the front yard setback. When you're talking about the front yard, the reason why we're putting the addition in the front, obviously, is this general policy that I think most municipalities have right now. Keep any additions away from the water. You're going to do an addition, try to locate it in the front. I've always been taught, ask for a front yard variance before you ask for dune crest variance, because it's just a more appropriate place to ask for relief than to try to get closer to the water. Everybody wants to get closer to the water, but it's just not practical to do. So all of the front addition is being located in that area north of the house, and the actual 80-foot setback line probably takes you to the stairs along the front. It's not shown on this survey, but if you were to put the 80-foot line in from the north side, which is where all the other 80-foot lines were taken, it's most of that front right rectangle would be within the 80-foot line. So that's the relief we're asking for. When you look at the aerials, you can see that it's consistent with the general setbacks along the Taylor Road. The properties on the west side are closer, but they're a little bit tighter and smaller. There's a couple of properties that are further away. This one would put us at basically right around the average setback. By locating it to the front northeast side, this is what I was getting at before, with the bend in the road, you look at the impact on the character, right? The actual setback from the road is further for us than it is for anybody else on the northeast side.
Now, I take your point on the curvature of the road, which sort of stretches the front yard visually, but you're also proposing to put the driveway.
Yes, and I'll talk about that
Yeah.
specifically. That's an intentional decision, because if you look at we were talking about impacts, right?
Yeah,
Variances,
yeah,
what are the impacts on the neighborhood? And Pat, could you show there's a front view, there's a rendering that is done to show what it's gonna look like. This drawing in your packet.
It's the second page.
Yes. And the driveway was carefully done because there's a grove of trees there that act already as screening. If you were to drive up, you can barely see the house. This shows the house as raised and with the addition by sort of bending the driveway around to the left, around that grove, allows you to come down Potato without having the full impact of your driveway going straight into the house. It's like an existing natural screening that bend creates for us. And so the design team has figured out a way to sort of bend the driveway around it, use that as natural screening, and allow that to mitigate against the visual of bringing the house addition a little bit closer to the street. At the same time, we're closing off the entrance on the west side of the driveway, which will then allow us to add some screening over there too for the other neighbors as they're coming back. So it was a thoughtful planning to try to utilize existing vegetation as mitigation. And when we saw the rendering, we realized it was going to work. It's not, the house is not going to be completely visible, but those are evergreens up there, and it will stay largely buffered from the bulk of the view coming down Potato. You guys have granted some relief before. There was a decision for, I think that's the one you were looking at, JDR, it's 81 Potato. And there was a comment made in that decision about how the desire is to locate additions away from the ocean, et cetera, rather than that sort of policy of the village is to try to accomplish that when you can.
Some of my concern was precisely because you are at the elbow and all of the residents of Potato Road are going to have it in their face as they come down the road, which I think you've directly addressed by retaining the grove and offsetting the driveway so that the house is not in there.
That was the plan. I mean, and that it was, I think it was a thoughtful way of approaching it. So that we've been working on this for over a year. You guys just get it now and you think, just whip this together. We've been working on this for over a year and different scenarios were played out. That was the one that made the most sense for sort of minimizing the impact on everybody. So, so that's our, I guess as far as the parking in the front yard too. There's parking up and down Potato Road in front yards and side yards. It's just still, you can't. The lots are narrow. Our lot's a little narrower than some of the others. They're 125 feet or more. A couple of the west are even narrower than ours, but there's pretty much parking in the front yard everything.
How many bedrooms are there?
Six.
So you have the minimum or the minimum number of parking spaces required in the code for the.
I think we do. The 2 nothing flags for not having.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. Okay.
Yeah, there's little vehicles put on the plan to show
Right.
where they're all set. And especially the last plan, which the landscape plan has the images on it. The other couple of other points on the front yard and the impacts from that. One thing you always look at is what neighbors are going to be impacted the most by this. And I'm not trying to minimize anybody's impact. Anybody always feels that their property is being picked on when you choose one side over another. But to the east of us, part of the reason we picked the northeast corner rather than the northwest corner to put the addition is that to the east of us, the nearest house is about 170 feet from where the addition is going to be. And there's a lot of vegetation in between. It's a 5-acre piece. To the west of us is a 125-foot wide piece. So in terms of trying to minimize the impacts, it made the most sense to put that there for that reason too. And also, as I mentioned before, it's about 1,300 square feet of addition and additional GFA. I think it's modest in the scheme of things that we're not asking for any GFA relief, and that GFA is based on, I would say, the small version of the lot. So if you exclude the road, we're not trying to take advantage of the additional area from the road. The GFA has been measured only from the south side of the road to the water, which is the requirement of it. As far as alternatives, I kind of explain why there really are no other alternatives for the additional living space. The substantiality of the variance, again, that's always in context. So that's why looking at the other properties along Potato Road is important. There are a couple of properties that have bigger front yard setbacks, but they also have smaller ingress setbacks. So the one that you approved for 25 Potato, you granted a bunch of variances to them you gave them a bunch of due precedent a few years back. They were able to achieve a bigger setback from the road, they have a wider lot, and they kind of oriented their house from side to side. Our lots are narrower, so we have to orient it north to south. And we just don't have the same room as they do to get to quite the same level of setback. And we did not want to ask for any additional extensions south of our existing footprint. I think it should go without saying that nothing we're proposing is going to cause an adverse physical or environmental impact. The FEMA compliance is by definition a benefit because we're complying with the safety requirement. The sanitary system upgrades that we're proposing are environmental benefit. And as far as the self-created difficulty, I'll say this once, everybody who purchases a lot with pre-existing regulations knows that there's a difficulty. And that's by definition self-created. On the other end of that, the lot is constrained. And so we are dealing with the combination of the FEMA laws, the coastal erosion laws that require us to go as far away from the water as possible, et cetera. So there is that consideration there. The next grouping of variances I want to talk about is both pyramid and height. And I guess you spent an hour on somebody's height variance. So I'm not going to skate by without having to talk about that, but we are proposing to lift an existing house. And what I said earlier was that only a portion of there's some elevation in the back of the package that shows how the west side of the property is flat roof, an existing flat roof. That's only going to pierce the 40-foot line by about a foot. The east side has a slope roof. And we've trimmed a little bit off the back of the slope roof because there were some overhangs on the existing structure. But the rear height, the edge of the rear, the ridge of the back is going to be at 25.5 foot mark. So we know it's a 5.5 foot variance to the rear of the building. It is what it is. That's what happens when you lift an existing building that has that kind of roof. We have been careful toward the front to continue the downward slope of the roof so that the front addition that we're putting on is going to taper down to at the 41-foot mark. So the bulk of the property is, the bulk of the house is closer to the 41-foot mark than it is to the 45, but we acknowledge that the rear ridge of that eastern section is going to be at 45.5 feet. As I mentioned earlier,
Could the slope of that roof be diminished without impeding the livable area of that space?
it's a, as it slopes down, it gets very tight. We wanted to maintain the existing functionality inside, because that is the sort of centerpiece of the house, is that room toward the back. So from a feasibility standpoint, to maintain that benefit, the answer is no. Obviously, what you're pointing out is, you could redesign a house any time, but you start losing certain benefits from it by.
I'm curious though, how high is the elevation from the floor to the peak of that?
In the rear.
Yeah, in the rear, where the maximum exceeds.
You know the answer, Ronnie?
From the floor to
For the inside ceiling?
Yeah, from floor to ceiling in that room, which has the maximum height of the slope, peak.
it's like 12 feet.
No, it can't be. It's gotta be more than that. It's.
So at the back of the room, it looks like it's, I just want to make sure I understand these plans. At the back of the room, it looks like it's 8.5 feet from floor to ceiling.
Yes, that's correct.
And so then when you get to the, well, back or front, whatever, so then if that's 8, be like 12.
Yeah, it looks like it may be about 4.8.
13. It's 13. Because you can
You can
take
see
the
it.
4311 minus 38.
5.8, about 13 feet.
Yeah.
It's 4.9 plus 8.
And there's no utilities or anything up there in the ceiling. That's clear open space.
Correct. That's correct.
And that's the existing roof that's on the
It's
house
the
right
existing
now.
slope. Yeah,
So
we've not added to the slope or detracted from it, but that is the.
What is the existing elevation on the first floor? 5 foot down from where it is now.
We're lifted at 5 feet, so
5 foot,
Entrance
so
to it.
that's 16. 16.
Yes.
it goes from 16 to 21.
He says back.
Yes.
So, what I was saying earlier was that the difficulty we have of dealing with FEMA is not going to be a domino effect. There's probably only one other house, which is the one immediately to the west at 11, that could at some point in the future be dealing with this, because the third house that's in the FEMA zone has already done the new construction. That was the one that you granted variances for, not for height, but for dune crest setbacks and some other relief. So the way, I don't know the exact numbers for the house next to us. If they comply with FEMA just by simply lifting what's there, they'd probably be at a foot or two higher than ours, but that's been a rough estimate that we just don't have enough data to confirm.
But that's only addressing the Potato Road neighborhood,
Yes,
not the rest of the oceanfront district.
that's it, right. I'm talking, and the rest of the Potato Road neighborhood is just not in the FEMA zone, so
Right.
all I'm pointing out. There are a couple of other houses though, that do exceed the 40-foot height as it is. So there's a 35 Potato Road, which is the bigger house in the middle, has a 47-foot elevation. Is not in the FEMA zone, so it's not a 47-foot elevation because of the FEMA zone, it's just a 47-foot elevation because that's the way it was built. And then 11 Potato, we found a height study that was in the 25 Potato file that projected the 11 Potato Road ridge height at 41.7 existing. So that's the one that if it had to be lifted a few more feet, it would probably end up a little bit over ours. So as far as the alternatives, we just talked about that a little bit. Lifting the house is lifting the house. In order to at least keep the benefits of the existing house, this is the minimum necessary to keep those benefits. The substantiality of the variance, as far as the pyramid, I want to point out that when you guys did 81, you gave them a de minimis pyramid relief of 57 cubic feet. You called it de minimis at that time, or a little bit more than 57 cubic feet. We're at 78. But I think it's still de minimis, especially when they were not faced with FEMA difficulty that we're faced with. They were just piercing the pyramid because they were. I'll rely on what I said before about no physical impacts or and the self-created nature of the application. So I'm going to talk about side yard setbacks, if that's okay. And we're talking about the generator and the stairs. I don't want to belabor that too much. We have to get the mechanicals out of the BFE. And we spent a lot of time trying to find locations for the generator and the stair and the other equipment. The only place it could go that we were able to find was where it's located. Some of it's under the stairs, as I said, and then there's the generator, which is just no practical place, but we can't fit the generator on the stairs. So I think we can show that there's no other feasible alternative for those things. And as far as the stairs go, that was the only practical location. We played around with other possibilities for the stairs to get to the decks, but to be able to circulate properly, that was the only place that we could find to achieve that. The last grouping of variances are the dune press setbacks for the stairs, the deck, and the little additions. The deck's pre-existing, the footprint's pre-existing. We're not encroaching any further into the dune press. And you have previously 25 Potato Road application granted far more relief as far as dune press setbacks go than what we're asking for, which is very de minimis addition to the negative space that I was talking about. That's our presentation. So we're here for questions and see if anybody has comments about it. That's what we got.
Any questions?
So you probably said this when you very first began. How many feet is the house going up? 5 feet.
Oh, being raised by 5, yes.
So it's only, the entire house is only getting lifted 5 feet.
Yes.
Questions? Anyone in the audience? Yes, sir.
I got a quick question, just.
Say your name, sir.
Identify yourself.
Frank Carlino, 11 Potato Road.
You should come up to speak.
Okay, well,
No. So you're the neighbor immediately to the west,
Yes.
adjacent on the west to the applicant.
okay, Frank Carlino, GMINO, 11 Potato Road. The question that I have, and I ran that road for 17 years, so when you say they park up and down Potato Road, that's, I don't know what does that refer to when you said they park up and down Potato Road?
I think he means that the parking is in the front yard.
Okay,
of the
that's what-
houses
so
on
I just want to
Potato
make sure that that's the only concern, and I told Marcy this, the only concern I have is to make sure they don't park on the road.
Yeah,
Because
right.
that would kind of eliminate the beauty of the landscaping if we look like we're, on a
No,
point,
clearly.
right? So that's what I'm concerned. Other than that, good luck. All right.
Yeah, I think the point is in houses along there, it's almost by necessity that the parking is in the front yard.
Yeah, I
But
didn't mean
certainly
over,
not on the road.
yeah, I didn't mean over the line onto the road.
Anyone here on Zoom who'd like to comment on this application? All right, and the Potato Road, obviously your next door neighbors here. Anyone else from Potato? Everyone's been notified of this application and it's here. All right, if there are no further questions, yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Mary Lee and I have discussed the height is 19, the FEMA regulation is 19, the bottom of the girder. And you got the top, the first floor is at 21. That's 2 feet of construction. Is it feasible to make that less?
To make it less, I'll have to defer to the architect.
Because then wouldn't that reduce the
Talking about
height?
raising the height 2 feet less.
Yeah, instead of having 2 feet, you
Yeah, well, that's not proposed.
could cut it down by a foot or more.
Come on up.
Yeah, come up and identify yourself. The base elevation of the first story is 2 feet higher than is required under FEMA, so.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Vanderhoel, VanDerHovel. I work with DMA Architects. That 2 feet takes into account the existing structure. If you look at the existing sections on file, there's the floor joist and a girder running below. So we weren't trying to mess with that by removing it or adding, new structure. We're simply just trying to lift.
Okay. I didn't realize it was existing, but.
Yep.
So that would be my next question. Since the first floor now is at 16, the bottom of the girder is at 14 now?
Yes.
Any further questions? Do you see any reason to keep the hearing open? No, we can keep it open.
I just feel like these age ones.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we just got some of this material. So we will probably do the same thing we did with the previous application, is keep the hearing open until the November meeting to allow the board to have a fuller opportunity to review the submissions and seek additional written or oral presentation if we feel it's necessary. So I will entertain a motion to continue this hearing to the November zoning board of appeals meeting at this location on the date that we ultimately select. That meeting will be held. Second, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you very much. Welcome to the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, and now to the main event that people probably on Zoom have been waiting. If they haven't fallen asleep. Thanks. Okay, we will now hear the application of SAG General Store Partners LLC pertaining to 542 SAG Main Street. Application 4 of 2022. And we're going to have 2 alternate members of the board sit to avoid any even appearance of potential conflict of interest. Okay, so in lieu of John White and Rich Thayer in this application, we're going to have a new member of the board, David McMillan, and Jay Dobson, who is an alternate member, sitting on this hearing. Okay, so Anthony's getting a workout today. A lot of people. Okay, so for the applicant, well, actually, you have agent for the applicant, David Curry, but I think Anthony Pasco will be making the initial presentation.
Different picture.
Right now, Pat, do you want to give us the names of the people who are present by Zoom, who may be sitting in on this?
Right now, I have Anthony Tokyo, Amber Williams, Eric Lemonidis, Jim Brasher, Regina Crumples and JJ Lando.
Now, before you begin, we have some preliminary business to attend to. Because this facility is an historic structure. Normally, it would be a type 1 alteration, which would require a secret application. And we have received a short environmental assessment form that was submitted to the board, which the board has reviewed. We considered the application, and I propose the following resolution. Whereas the board has considered the application to Sagaponic General Partners LLC pursuant to 6 NYC, should this be SRR Part 617?
No, CRR.
It is CRR. Oh, it is CRR, okay. Whereas the board is unable to identify any significant adverse environmental impact by reason of the reconstruction of the SAG General Store involving less than 4,000 square feet of gross floor area, not involving any change of use. And whereas the board has determined this is a type 2 action under 6 MYCRR 617.5 C9. Now therefore, the board approves the issuance of this resolution as a negative declaration. Do I hear I will submit this on my motion. Do I hear a second? You understand the implication of what we're saying here?
I think I do, but not quite enough. to
Okay, so
second.
let me say, normally for an historic structure like this, it would require an environmental impact study, full environmental impact study. Because the structure is under 4,000 square feet, and because there is no change in the use, we are able to accept this short form assessment, so identifying it and treat it as a type 2 alteration, which does not require a full environmental impact study. And the purport of the resolution I just read into the record will acknowledge that it's a type 2 alteration that does not require secret. So I am making a motion to adopt that resolution. I hear a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so you have
Thank
now
you.
the floor to proceed.
Thank you. That's something that we actually needed to give to the health department. They always look to the village to do the secret decision, and we're waiting for that. So thank you for doing that first.
And by the way, I'll help you out with one more thing too. Generally, we have a single and separate survey, which is done through title companies. But in view of the impact of the hacking of the Suffolk County Clerk's office, which has been closed for virtually a month and difficulty, I gather you did the single and separate search yourself.
I did. I had all the information, and I did an attorney affirmation, which is allowed it in lieu of a title company.
Our council has so confirmed, so we will accept that as the single and separate, and the postings you have. Okay.
Yes, we do have the affidavits of posting and mailing.
All right, now, AHRB informally reviewed your plans previously when you gave us the courtesy your client did of all of us hearing what you proposed to do. But the AHRB cannot formally adopt any resolution until we have determined what would be legal with or without variances. So you are now, you can make your presentation.
Thank you. All right, so Anthony Pasca, Essex Scepter Angel Battalion Pasca. We are the attorneys for the project. Beth Baldwin from my office. David Curry, sitting over there. Some of you have seen a few times before, is basically the owner's rep and project manager for the entire project. He's been dealing with the post office and pretty much everything related to this project. And our planner, Britton Bistry, is also here. We do have an architect who was not able to make it. I think we'll be able to manage without him. As you pointed out, Chairman, we did have that introductory meeting a few months ago, which was tremendously generous by the village to put that all together. It gave us an opportunity to really get at least some informal feedback, which was very helpful because we went back after receiving some of that feedback and we were able to make a few changes right off the bat without having to go through the formal process. And the big change that we made since what you first saw was that we had originally proposed to add basically an attic to the building. And the attic was designed to store artifacts that we were kind of told, if you can find a room for these artifacts, please do. We proposed the attic, but it did add a little bit of massing to the project. And so when ARB looked at it, and everybody looked at it and said, well, we'll find another place for the artifacts. And because they did that, we were able to eliminate the addition in the attic. And so at the same time, reducing the massing of the new building. I shouldn't even call it new. It's not new, it's a refurbished building. So the other change that we made was that it was asked of us to consider putting back the second front door to the post office, something that a few ARB members asked us to do, and we did do that. So the current plans have both the side door to the post office to the ramp, as well as the front door from the porch. And there's also an internal connection between the post office and the store that's going to allow for proper ADA circulation and access from the ramp through the post office into the store. Everything will become accessible. Okay, so we have, as you pointed out, we have 3 boards with jurisdiction over this. You are the first stop because this is a non-conforming use, and or at least partially a non-conforming use. And because of that, really the other boards can't act without you confirming that what we're proposing is consistent with zoning. If and when you do that, we'll then be able to get decisions from the ARB with respect to the historic and architectural features, and from the Board of Trustees acting as planning with respect to the site plan. So I want to start by talking about what our project goals are. And really the big picture goals here, it's not that complicated. It is to preserve the historic uses, not change them, preserve them, but make some improvements to the site to make it more modern code compliance, I would say. Not to make it more modern, but to bring it up to current understandings of what building requirements are, what site plan requirements are, and other environmental requirements are. So functional improvements and tweaking, but basically to keep the historic uses, number 1, 2, and 3 goal is to keep those uses here, especially really to protect the post office, which they are subject to federal laws, they're subject to ADA requirements, and they're not fully compliant right now. One of our goals, big picture goals, is to make sure that we can set this building up. It's been around for 140 or 50 years, set it up for the next 150 years, and give the post office no excuse to ever consider relocating out of the village. We have 2 existing historic uses of the property. One is let's talk about the non-conforming use, which is why we really have triggered your jurisdiction, and that is the store. We have no commercial zoning in the village, so which is understandable. This is only 2 or 3 properties with actual commercial uses on the entire village. So it's understandable that the authors of the zoning code would waste their time drafting the code to accommodate 1 7,000 square foot property that happens to have a historic general store on it. So it's a non-conforming use, but I want to start by saying that there's non-conforming uses, there's really non-conforming uses. And the reason I say that is that in the general parlance of zoning, when we talk about non-conforming uses, the typical thought is a use that the municipality does not want and eventually wants to phase out. And so we think about the easiest examples would be a nightclub in the middle of a residential district, or a sand mine, or an asphalt plant in the middle of a residential district. Those are true non-conforming uses, ones that you hope to phase out over time and replace with whatever's conforming to the district, but we're in a residential district. We've never heard a single person say to us that they want the store to disappear and they want it to be replaced with a house instead. Nobody wants that. I think that's, so when I say that there's non-conforming and there's really non-conforming, we're in the former category where we are technically non-conforming because there's no code that accommodates any commercial uses in the village, but we're not non-conforming in that the big capital N sense of being the type of use that the village should want to eliminate or does want to eliminate over time. And let's face it, it's a use that's important to the character of the community. So the things that you guys deal with as a zoning board all the time are, what are the impacts on the character of the community? When you're talking about a use that's as historic as the general store is, it takes on a different kind of impact on that character of the community. Some people would say it's a vital part of the character of this community, and therefore any measure that can be taken to protect it and preserve it and keep it going for the next several generations is a benefit to the community as opposed to a detriment. So the second use we have on the property, of course, is the store, post office. And if we were to apply the village code strictly, it would be a special permit use. That's what a governmental building is. However, it's a federal governmental use. And one of the things we've provided to you, I'm going to give credit to Mr. Toho because he's the one who pointed us to this law, is that there's just a blanket federal exemption for post offices. They are not subject to local zoning. They're not subject to county zoning, county regulations. They're not subject to any state, county, or local regulations. I say that, but we have two uses under one roof. So we're not coming to you saying our entire project's exempt from your review. We're going to do what we want. That's not what we're here for. That's not why I'm bringing up the exemption. But it is a factor for you guys to take into account that we have two uses under one roof. The two uses are contributing to the dimensional nonconformities that we have that we've been dealing with from a variance standpoint. If we didn't have a post office, we could build a smaller building and we wouldn't pierce the pyramid quite the same way. We could have bigger setbacks, all that. But we do have a post office. It's generally on the north side of the building, which is where our setback nonconformities are the greatest. So it's appropriate for you to take that into account, that we have an exempt, literally an exempt use within the building that does have dimensional nonconformities. So the big challenge that we have for this project that we've been, everybody wants us to get this done as soon as possible. We know that, but it is a challenge to make sure that we're going to do this for the next, set this building up in the next 150 years. We do it right. We do it right now. And so we've taken the time to talk to a lot of people, to talk to the post office about their needs, and to try to anticipate the types of things that this generation wants, but the next generation, the generation after that might want, and try to set up a site that works a little better than the site that's there. You think about when this was built in the late 1800s and invented zoning at the time. Nobody knew what zoning was. There was no such thing as zoning until the early 1900s. There's no such thing as a state building code. No such thing as a fire safety code. There's no such thing as the Suffolk County Sanitary Code for deciding how you lay out septic systems. There was no historic review code, for obvious reasons. And the Americans with Disability Act could not be adopted for another 100 years after this was built. So a lot of things happened in between this building first being built and the state of affairs and regulatory requirements that we have now, and the things we know now if we were designing something from scratch. So our goal is to try to incorporate as much of that into this refurbished building, but still maintain the historic integrity of it, the character of it, and of course, the uses, most importantly. And if we do that right, then we'll be able to really set this up for the next several generations to enjoy it in a safer way. We have come up with a plan that's before you now. Our design teams come up with a plan that will fully meet the New York State Building Code. It will fully meet the New York State Fire Code. We sprinkled. We've brought public water to the site for that reason, so we have enough water pressure to sprinkle the building. By the time we're ready to start, which hopefully is going to be within a month or so, we will have Suffolk County Health Department approval of a newfangled sanitary system, and we will be, we think we will be 100% ADA compliant, based on some changes that we're making to the circulation and accessibility of the site. And we're adding, talk about it a little bit too, but we're adding this, essentially this rear portion of the building, which is going to be designed to give us ADA access to an elevator, ADA access to accessible bathrooms, and allow anyone with disabilities to reach the basement level of the building, which they cannot do right now. So those are our goals, and we should talk about the challenges that lead us to your board. Number one is size of this property. It's a 7,000 square foot lot. It is 1/6 of an acre in an R120 district. So the math doesn't work for us as far as fitting within the typical constraints of an R120 district. If you add the typical 80-foot front yard setback, and we have a negative building envelope here on both sides, really. So there is no, the number one constraint as far as zoning compliance is the size of the lot and the limited options we have for even making small adjustments within that size of the lot. The second constraint is really the setbacks that are imposed on us by the zoning code, which we really challenge with trying to meet as much as possible. We can't meet all those setbacks, and so that's why we're here for variances, but we'll go through that a little bit to show you why we've chosen to try to comply with some of them, make some of them better. And then the other constraint we have from the zoning code is the pyramid requirement, which when you have a 7,000 square foot lot with a building that's right now 6 inches from the road, there's no way to meet the pyramid requirements either. And so we've made some adjustments to that to become more conforming to the pyramid code. So with all those constraints, we've been flagged for 7 variances. So we'll just list them first. One is the pyramid variance that I mentioned. It's 3166 cubic feet, piercing the pyramid plane. Don't know if that sounds like a lot or not, but compared to the existing, that's a 60% reduction from the existing building, which is 8751 cubic feet. The front yard setback is going to 6 foot 1 inches, where 80 feet is required, which again sounds like a lot, except that the existing front yard setback 6 inches, right? So that's another significant improvement to zoning conformity. Our total side yard variance is flagged at 10 feet 2 inches, where 20 feet is required. And we need 1 individual side yard variance, which is the north side, which goes down to 1 inch. And we'll talk about that a little bit. The reason was to get 1 side yard to conforming 10 feet, which is important for access to the rear of the building. So we need 1 side yard variance. Right now, there's 2 side yard non-conformities. Neither of them meet 10-foot requirement. We can flag for a rear yard at 15 feet 2 inches, where 34 feet 6 inches is required. A coverage variance, we're seeking 4,000 square feet, 57% or 3512 square feet would otherwise be allowed at 50%. And the last one is for the dumpster at 1 foot from the rear property line, where 20 feet would otherwise be required. So let's talk about your factors. You guys know your 5 factors well. Let's go through those because it kind of enables us to talk about this project and the benefits that we're trying to accomplish with it. Let's starting with the character of the neighborhood. And I think that's always the most important place to start. We kind of identified 5 big considerations we want you to take into account. The one is maybe the most subjective or qualitative consideration, which is to ask you to keep in mind all the benefits that we're trying to accomplish with this. And I started talking about it earlier that this project is not, it's not really about us. It's a community project. And there's going to be cynical people out there who think that's just talk, but the owners did not acquire this property to make money on it. It's not what it's about. This was really been viewed from the beginning. I've been involved since before they were able to get the property. It was a chore to make that deal, and it's been a labor of love for the owner, and David's been involved in that, and it's really been always tailored to do something good for the community and to take this building that needs a little love and attention and to do something right for it. It's not being turned into a Tiffany's. It's being kept what it is, and it's being protected for future generations. And so all the improvements that we've talked about and we keep talking about, that all factors into the variance analysis, which is what's the impact on the character of the neighborhood? Well, it's a beneficial impact on the character of the neighborhood. Qualitatively and subjectively, that certainly fits within what you guys do when you're crunching your 5 factors. We can talk about the specifics of it too, which is we are making this code compliant, we're bringing better safety measures into an existing building that lacks safety measures. The ability to make those changes is all based on our ability to get through this process and present something to the village, all 3 boards, that's acceptable and the community really feels like it's going to be a good thing and an improvement over what's there. The second big consideration is that from a zoning standpoint, we're getting mostly more non-conforming to, and we've been conscious to try to figure out ways to look at the pre-existing non-conformities and get them more conforming. So even though we've been flagged for 7 variances, a bunch of them are actually substantial improvements over what the pre-existing non-conformities are. So the front yard setback went from 6 inches to 6 feet 1 inch is a big improvement from, even though it's still a substantial non-conformity, it's a big improvement from the pre-existing non-conformity. The pyramid being cut 60% from an 8751 cubic feet to 3166. Again, that's a big improvement to get it closer in line to the village's requirements. The southern side yard setback right now is 7 feet 11 inches. And it was an important design element for us to get the building slightly shifted north to be able to create a 10-foot access to the rear, because it's a safety requirement, and it's also gives us an actual conforming way to reach the rear for deliveries. Keep the dumpster back there, make sure that we have a legal way to get to the dumpster, have deliveries brought to the back so they don't have to come mingle with the front of the building. So getting a conforming 10-foot setback on the south side is important, and we were able to do that by shifting the building just slightly. And then I'll say the same thing about the front yard setback. What we accomplished by taking it from 1 inch to 6 feet, or 6 inches to 6 feet 1 inch, the big push there, it's only a small shift. I mean, that much of a shift, but that's a conflict point from a safety standpoint to have the entrance to the building be that close to the vehicular traffic. So our feeling was to build in that little bit of buffer, that little extra 6 foot of buffer, to create a little bit more movement, so people getting to the post office or the general store have a little bit more room to manage that front of the building, and yet not push it so far back that it really changes the character of it, because there's that balance too. There's a tension between wanting to keep it in the front, you know, the visible front, but also make it just a little bit safer. So we thought that that 6 foot buffer, that pushing it back a little 6 feet extra was just enough. It's just sort of the right balance between improving safety, but not losing the historic integrity of it. And then also point out, as far as zoning conformance, which is that the amount of space attributable to the non-conforming use is actually going down a little bit. The shift in the building is really towards the post office, and it's kind of a twofold shift. One is to create this common area in the back, so that neither of the spaces is going to have their own non-compliant bathrooms. There's going to be one compliant bathroom in the back, compliant set of stairs, and an elevator in that new back section. It's going to serve both uses, and by doing that, it freed up some space that we could give to the post office, not only on the main level, but in the basement level too. So their space is going up in terms of their usable space, and the store's space is going down a little bit. We talked with the village about how to account for the ADA space in the back. It's a common area, and we figured it, even if we took half of that space and called it part of the store, we're still going down in number. So there's no expansion of the non-conforming use. There is an expansion, a little expansion of the post office use, and it's a functional one for them. So all of those benefits from a zoning standpoint impact the character of the community in a good way. And the third consideration is that for the few variances that are increasing, the few dimensional nonconformities that are increasing, we've been careful to only ask for them if they're necessary and they can be justified by some other benefit that's coming from it. So the coverage is something that's going up on the site, but it's a result of not adding more space to the store or a worse design for the store, but adding that ADA compliant common area in the back is what's leading to an increase. That's a trade-off we can make any day, because that's a necessary improvement to this site to make it viable. The rear yard setback's the same thing. It's going down, but there's two benefits coming that's leading to that. One is that ADA area, which is the closest to the rear yard. The other is that 6 foot shift of the building to try to get it a little further back from the street. So both of those benefits are leading to a necessary rear yard variance. And then the last one that's going down is the northern side yard variance. We're asking for basically building 1 inch to the property line on the front side. And that's what I was saying before about, in order to create that 10-foot conforming driveway access at the south side, that was the only way to get it, was to get the building up to the property line on the north side. We do have a pre-existing access easement along the north side that kind of mitigates against that. That was something that was set up by the village many years ago to create that access easement along the north in between the property. And we've already been talking to them about some nice vegetation there, a stream for them. And we're working with them, anything they need, they're gonna get on that side. So those are really the variances that are going up, and they're only going up for important reasons. The fourth consideration on this is how unique this property is. And you guys get that all the time. Oh, I'm unique. This is unique. There's nothing, you will never get another application like this other than this property. To say that it's unique, it's probably the easiest time I'll ever get to make that statement. So I'm not going to belabor it. The fact that there is no commercial zoning in the village, I mean, that's unique too. There's only a few villages around that have only residential zoning, but it's completely understandable that you wouldn't design a zoning code for one 7,000 square foot non-conforming use. That's why you guys are here, because zoning boards are meant to accommodate those kinds of imperfections in zoning codes. And then the last consideration about this is the lack of any adverse impact on neighbors. And so we have the farm to the south of us. They're not going to be adversely affected by the building shifting slightly away from them. The Hildreths have, it's thanks to them that we're able to do this project. I mean, we have been in touch with them. They saw the original plans and they signed off on the original plans. And so what we're doing is very much directly out of concern for them, and we're making sure that they're taken care of. And they surround us. So we have the farm to the south, and we have the Hildreths to the west and the north of us. And so it's unique in that sense too, that we have no impacted direct neighbors. So all that said, I think the first factor in your analysis weighs very heavily in favor of the application. Second factor, feasible alternatives. I don't think I can belabor that too much either. With 7,000 square foot property, there's no other place, there's no way to accommodate the changes and improvements we want to make without some variance relief from this board. That sort of typical push-pull where we're trying to make a more accommodating front yard setback. We're going to run into the backyard. And we also have, just keep in mind, it's like a trapezoidal property. It's narrower as you go back. So in terms of feasible alternatives, you can only take the building off the street a few feet before you start getting into the pinch of the rear yard narrowly, and you then make it feasible. The second factor we think weighs heavily on it too. Third factor being substantiality. The numbers are big numbers, but they are also pre-existing big numbers. So every time we talk about substantiality, it's about the context of it. And I'm not going to belabor that either, but I think the context of us making improvements to the site, including zoning improvements to make it somewhat more conforming in several respects, means that even though the numbers are substantial, the actual variance we're asking for is not substantial. Physical environmental impacts. Everything we talked about as far as code compliance, sanitary improvements, safety improvements, all of that we would say is considered a physical and an environmental benefit, not a detriment. We think that factor weighs heavily our way. And then the last factor is whether it's a self-created hardship. And like I said on the other application, sure, when you buy a property that you know is restricted by zoning, it's self-created in that respect. But it's also property that's been around, as I said, long before zoning was ever invented. So all the regulations that have now created the hardship are regulations that have been imposed on this building and managed to survive up to now. And our goal is to make sure it gets to survive for generations to come. So I don't have more to say other than to say we want to answer any questions you have today. I'm gonna tell you why, which is that everybody has asked us to try to get this open for next season. And we're committed to doing it. We have a very aggressive construction schedule that would go into play as soon as we get all our approvals. Losing another month in a process with you, which then makes us lose another month with the ARB, is a lot. And so we would like to answer every question you have, the answer to close the hearing today. If there's any question the public has about this, try to get it to a point where you can come to the hearing so that we can move on. Try to hit our aggressive goal of being open next season.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody have any questions? Any questions?
I guess, I mean, it's just more of a curiosity than anything that would have to do specifically with zoning, but you talked about working to accommodate the post office. And I sometimes wonder, like, how long will the post office stay here anyway? Like, so like, what assurance do we have, like, and again, this doesn't really.
No, it's a fair question,
Yeah.
and I can tell you they have a long-term lease. It's basically renewable every set number of years.
So they seem game on keeping that
They
spot.
do, and they've been engaged with David about making improvements to this.
The post office?
Yeah, yeah, and I'll tell you what our goal is, like, this is what we're charged with. We want to give them no excuse for it. And so that's what we're really focused on. You can't control what they do 50 years from now, 100 years from now. We want to give them no excuses. So all the improvements that we're talking about are like designed to take away any excuse they would ever have to say, let's consolidate somewhere else and get rid of the post office here.
I feel like my questions might have to do more with like just a member of the community than maybe specific zoning board.
That's okay.
So like,
You know what?
were they going to stay open year round? Like, that's always a big question. And I guess that's such a business, like that's somebody's private. But I think, yeah, like I think it's very painful to have it shut every year, you know, like.
I can tell you, our goal is to stay open.
Is it?
That's what the plan is. We've had cynics tell us, that's what everybody says, and it never happens. But that is the plan. So.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry, I'm kind of new and I did have a 3-hour tutorial with Tony, so I probably know more about zoning than I ever want to know right now. But my understanding is the post office was exempt from any type of variance request. What happens if they decide not to go? And what happens if they leave? What happens to that space going forward? Does that mean that the non-conforming variances that you seek relief from, does that transfer to the new owner?
I really don't. You're asking a really good question. I think we all hope we'll never ever have to answer that question. It's a good question because that always happens with non-conforming uses. Sometimes you do have multiple non-conforming uses in one building and one may shut down. That's going to be largely an initial question for John. As I mean, let's say they did leave, would the store take its space? I don't know. I mean, that's something that would have to be worked out. But I don't want to. I'd rather not talk about that hypothetical, just because it's kind of a horror scenario that nobody really wants to.
But you're asking the board to approve a variance that will transfer to any new owner or any new business going forward.
Not actually, no. You want to say that, Tony?
There is no transfer. If what you're describing were to occur, whoever the property owner is who proposes any use of the space now used and occupied by the post office would have to come into John. John would then issue a denial, and that applicant would be back before you, and they would be asked to get all kinds of variances. I'm not even sure, without more facts and an actual set of facts, exactly what variances they would need. But there's no grant of relief in the blind or in the abstract, and there's nothing transferable about what's going on here.
Thank you.
This is a very unique application, which, as I pointed out to you, you have never had an application before where it's a federal facility, and in this case, a federal facility located on property owned by a private third party, not by a governmental entity. But the case law is well established. that they are exempt from local land use controls. And so all you can work with is what is before you right now, the facts that we know.
And I'll say too, that we didn't come to you saying that just because it's a post office, you know, we get all these exemptions from your zoning code. We want you to be comfortable. We want the village, everybody in the village, all three boards to be comfortable with what we're doing. And so we're not claiming any exemptions. It was just pointing out that that use is not a non-conforming use. It's an exempt use. That's all.
In fact, the enhancements to this building is expressly an inducement to keep the post office.
For
sure.
Yes, that's our.
And the term of the post office use is within its control more than the owners, regardless of the lease. Right?
I think that would
The
always
options.
be the case.
Yeah.
I mean,
So, and the nature of the variances being sought here are not significantly different because it's a post office in the building than they would be if it were just a single non-conforming use. Not increasing the footprint of the building. You are reducing the non-conformity in a number of respects that you have. So that even if the post office left, though the new use might be increasing the non-conforming use and require further variances, I don't think we would be dealing with offensive expansions physically, if the bulk of the property in any way, and would have control over use. Now, when the law was being drafted, the zoning law, there are actually 9 commercial uses in the village. And I was in favor of having a commercial district, strictly controlled, but it was determined that we would have better control over the nonconformities. And as you suggested earlier in your discussion, the ability to phase out offensive nonconforming uses better than if we had a commercial district. So this, I appreciate the lawyerliness of your presentation on all of the key features as an attorney and a member of the zoning board, but as a resident of Sagaponic, I think it's pretty intuitive that this is a unique property for a unique use in a unique location. It's a totally one-off situation. This property is as key to Sagaponic as the Sag Harbor Cinema is to the Sag Harbor, and I think it certainly warrants special attention. I don't know if there's anyone else on Zoom who wants to comment on the application. Speak up now. In the room.
If the building's moved, how?
Ma'am, just have to state your name, ma'am, just have to state your name, if you don't mind.
Please come up and speak if you're gonna come.
I just want to say.
You can speak from there, just speak up so we know who you are.
Senator Weissman in Sagaponic. If the building's moved, how will the building operate while it's being moved?
Okay, that's a good question. So the post office is going to need temporary occupancy during the construction. The store would be closed. But the post office, I believe you are working out alternate locations.
We are. There'll be a like a temporary post office set up. We're exploring locations within the village so that nobody has to leave the village to do that. It'll be a trailer that will have at least as much room as the existing post office has, but it'll be set up with a trailer. They'll be able to have boxes there. And we're present. David's been working with them to secure the right facility for them and to secure a good location. We do have a few locations in mind, but I don't want to go there yet until we've actually secured. So, but it'll be offsite.
And David, correct, yeah, the goal is that service is not interrupted. So the post office stays in the village even during construction and service is not. Very good.
Yes, state your name, please.
My name is Tika Topping, and I'm a resident of Sagaponic. I've heard just sort of peripherally gossip about the fact that the store might become a restaurant. There might be tables. And so now you mentioned the store, but you didn't address the use of the store beyond what it's already.
Okay, that's a very good question. It will not, there is no takeout dining proposed. It's a completely different health department kind of thing, and we're not asking for that.
No change.
Right
in
now,
use.
no change of use, and even right now, although there might be a hope someday to have a couple of chairs around, for people to sit and wait for their coffee if that's what they want, we're not even proposing that right now. That's gonna be something that, we'll talk to the village about. If the village is willing to give us a trial run for a season to put a couple of chairs around, we'll do it. If not, we won't. But there's no design to do any table service, the restaurant service, anything of that nature. It's gonna be strictly take out to go foods and goods.
The combination of the post office and the store in this structure has made it a gathering spot for the village. The setback that they propose will make that gathering space safer and better, including the porch area where people can gather. So I think that's a great benefit.
And we don't even have set designs on all the offerings that are made either. The owners want to be reactive to the community. What the community wants us to have is that's what we're going to be targeting. So
You've secured.
it's not going to be a restaurant, I promise you.
You've secured the easement for the septic and all that. Done.
Yes, we have an agreement on that. Although it may turn out we don't need it. So that's something that's being dealt with by the health department, but there is a possibility, maybe even a strong probability that the sanitary system will be located 100% on the property. Without the easement, but we did, the Hilton family was kind enough to agree to do that if we need it. Yes.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Marilyn, you have a question or a comment?
No.
No comment?
I'd like to ask one. I think you said in your presentation that the pyramid, the non-conforming portion of the pyramid is reduced. And that's obviously a good thing. How is that achieved? Is that achieved by moving the building to the north?
It's mostly the front. It's mostly coming off the fact that it's going from 6 inches on the property line to 6 feet. And then with the porch, even that helps a little bit. So it's a combination of the shift back from the street that's reducing.
West. All right, well, I'm inclined to agree with the applicant that we should close the hearing and not delay the process any longer unless I hear any objections to that. I would make a motion to close the hearing and perhaps even go further and make a determination on the grant of variances tonight.
You want me to dictate a proposed decision?
I appreciate that.
All right. I'll go as slowly as I can. It's a little bit, I have a lot of thoughts, and so it'll take me a minute. This is an application for area variances incident to the proposed restoration of premises known as the SAG General Store at 542 SAG Main Street. The premises is a 7,024 square foot parcel improved with a 2-story wood frame structure in the R120 zoning district. The existing building is entirely dimensionally non-conforming. Applicant seeks the following relief. 1, a front yard setback of 6 feet 1 inch, where the zoning code requires 80 feet. 2, total side yards of 10 feet 2 inches, where the zoning code requires 20 feet. 3, individual side yard setback of 1 inch, where the zoning code requires 10 feet. 4, rear yard setback of 15 feet 2 inches, where the zoning code requires 34 feet 6 inches. 5, a pyramid intrusion of 3,166 square feet. 6, lot coverage of 57%, where the zoning code allows 50%. And 7, accessory structure, parens, dumpster enclosure, close parens, rear yard setback of 1 foot, where the zoning code requires 30 feet. This matter was presented on October 14, 2022, at which time there was no opposition from the public, although public did participate in the presentation. Upon the aforesaid presentation and the documentary and public record, the board makes the following findings. 1, The board has examined a single and separate search submitted as required by Village Code, section 245-53, parens E, close parens, and certified by Anthony C. Pasca, an attorney, as permitted by the aforesaid subsection of the Village Code, and finds that the premises is a single and separate parcel. 2, the premises is within the Sagaponack Historic District and is listed at section 7, page 5 of the United States Department of the Interior National Register of Historic Places, a circumstance typically requiring a review whether this application is a type 1 action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SEQA, particularly section 617.4 sub B sub 9. The board's review finds this is not an unlisted action, and none of the thresholds in section 617.4 are exceeded. The board further finds this is a type 2 action under SEQA section 617.5 sub C sub 9, a non-residential structure less than 4,000 square feet of gross floor area. 3, the use of the building at this site for more than 100 years has been in part a general store, in recent memory serving coffee, sandwiches, and snacks without sit-down service, and a United States post office. Under established law, the portion of the premises occupied by the post office is not subject to local land use controls, including Village Code, Chapter 245. 4, the public record shows that the premises has been the recipient of a certificate of occupancy dated July 20, 1967, variance approvals from the town of Southampton, Zoning Board of Appeals, and numerous certificates of compliance from the Village of Sagaponack Building Department. 5, Village Code section 245-46 exempts the subject premises from parking requirements because variances on the record, the premises on the record is lawfully in use and is not being enlarged. 6, except to reconfigure spaces, applicant does not propose any changes of the existing uses. 7, applicant enjoys an ingress-egress easement on the northerly contiguous parcel adjacent the property line with the proposed 1-inch setback. 8, specific changes by way of illustration, not limitation, include the following. A, improve the existing non-conforming front yard setback, now 6 inches, essentially on the boundary line, to 6 feet 1 inch. B, improve the southern side yard setback from an existing 7 feet 11 inches to 10 feet 1 inch, enabling vehicular access to the rear yard. C, reduce the existing pyramid intrusion from 8,751 cubic feet to 3,166 cubic feet. D, reduce the floor area of the main floor of the general store from 1,712 square feet to 1,501 square feet. E, install an ADA compliant bathroom and access ramp. And F, redesign the interior of the post office to accommodate public use. 9, although the premises is non-conforming, meaning subject to a typical risk of eventual amortization as a matter of typical land use policy, the Village of Sagaponack uniquely likely would prefer the continuation of each of the existing uses, not the cessation of either. 10, applicants' proposed modification for the subject premises are subject to the review and approval of the Board of Trustees under Village Code sections 245, 65, and the Architectural and Historic Review Board under Village Code Chapter 245, Article 10. Upon the above findings and the record before the board makes the following conclusions. A, the premises has been in use at this location, including various prior modifications to location and exterior appearance for more than 100 years. Applicants' proposed modifications are part of a succession of changes, now none of which alter the pre-existing use or essential appearance of the structure. Accordingly, the board does not find that a grant of the requested relief will introduce an undesirable change in the neighborhood. B, the record does not contain any evidence of a feasible alternative to the applicant's plans. The plans before the board appear reasonable in scope and respectful to the importance of this structure and its uses in this community. C, substantiality may be measured arithmetically or contextually. The surveys in the public record, including by way of illustration, the June 15, 1992 survey of the premises prepared by Lester Holden shows that the premises has always been dimensionally non-conforming in all pertinent respects. In view of history, the relief requested now is not substantial. D, the record is devoid of any evidence of environmental harm if the requested relief is granted. E, the non-conforming conditions of the premises are, as aforesaid, historic and long-term and existed upon the applicant's acquisition of title. The board does not find any self-created hardship. Upon the foregoing findings and conclusions, this application is granted in all respects with the proviso, no grant of relief hereunder addresses, authorizes, or allows any improvement different from or in addition to the variances enumerated in the first paragraph of this decision. That's the proposed draft.
Thank you very much. I could never do that off the top of my head like you just did.
No, it's I've had some practice.
Anyway, so as Mr. Tohill has so graciously provided us with a very detailed resolution, I will entertain a motion to adopt that resolution. I'll make that motion that we adopt the resolution. Do I hear a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And it's unanimously granted. Congratulations. Thank you. Good luck with
Thank you for the accommodation. Really terrific.
and thank your client for doing it.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, nice to see you all.
You know, he's the only guy I know who might have been able to do that.
I'm gonna ask him to repeat it, but I thought that'd be a bit much. I didn't catch that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wait a minute. We have one further piece of business here. I'm sorry. I got so excited. We, our November meeting is scheduled Friday, 11th, which is Veterans Day. So I wanted to, yeah, John, wait a minute, we're still in session. We don't need them, we need us. We need us. We don't need you guys. Maybe you, John. The only further item of business is that the November meeting is on Veterans Day, and we want to decide when to hold it in lieu of Friday, the afternoon of the 11th, right? So the proposal is to have a meeting on Monday, November 14th. Is that amenable to the members of the board?
I can make it anytime.
You can make it, make it. Any preference for whether it's the morning or the afternoon? Any preference from any of the other boards that meet here? Or anything like that?
No, nobody that.
Okay, then we could do it Monday afternoon. We'll do it same
Same
3
time.
o'clock. We might also consider holding this zoning board meeting in the future earlier than 3 o'clock. We've had a pretty quiet year thus far, but if we have multiple applications, we may want to start a little bit earlier. So
Seems like especially in the winter, like even now to leave here.
Where it's
you're
getting
like,
dark.
Damn, I was here all
So you
day.
want to move it up to like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, something like that would be better.
It has to be noticed the same.
Yeah, yeah.
always, Yeah, so I
I mean,
don't
we
know.
don't have to do that this month. Well, think about it and we can decide on that next meeting.
Okay, motion to
Okay.
change the meeting?
Motion to change the November zoning board meeting.
I'll make that motion.
From the 11th to the 14th.
November 14th, 3 p.m.
We need a motion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll make one.
Okay, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Now motion to adjourn. Yeah. Okay, motion, second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, now you can all go.
Yeah.
Thank you, David,
You're welcome.
for joining us. Welcome aboard. I don't know if you met everybody else. on the board.
It's on.